Welcome, everyone, to the Australian Bitcoin podcast. I'm Justin, your host, and today I'm joined by Pete Winn from bitcoinforhumans.com. But before we start, a quick word from our sponsor. The Australian Bitcoin podcast is brought to you by hardblock.com.au, Australia's first and oldest Bitcoin-only exchange. Hardblock aims to help their users save in hard money and to become self-sovereign Bitcoiners. Hardblock has no added fees on deposits, buys, or sell transactions. So the prices are what you see is what you get. Hardblock's Bitcoin withdrawal fees are also among the cheapest in Australia, including a very low 99 sat Bitcoin withdrawal cost when using their new auto send feature. Check out Hardblock today. All right, Pete, how's it going?
Hey, Justin. Great. I had a lovely little start to the day this morning. Headed down to the beach, had a nice cold dip and a little hangout. So that was good. So in a good mood.
It's always a good way to start the day. I've been doing some bouldering recently, which is probably one of the least useful skills that you could have, but it's also pretty challenging and kind of fun, both mentally and physically. So I did that earlier this morning as well, just to get a bit in. But because I'm relatively new to it, like a month or so in, I'm never sure exactly how I'm going to leave one of those sessions, whether I'm going to be like just completely stuffed for the rest of the day and everything's aching, or whether I'll come back feeling pumped. I'm glad I've come back feeling pumped because that's the right kind of mood that I need for a podcast rather than the opposite. So glad that we both had our physical kind of environmental thing this morning, and then we can jump into some Bitcoin.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of swimming recently in the ocean, but they've now removed the shark nets, and it was one of those mornings where it was a little bit cloudy in the water, and I was like, I might not go for a long swim. I might just float around a bit and play in the waves. But
definitely.
It's good. Yeah.
Have you found that as you've gotten older, that concern for things like, I don't know, creatures that could kill you in the environment has increased? Because I never used to have any regard for sharks at the beach whatsoever, even though sometimes there would be, news reports of shark sightings, or there would be the shark net. So that sharks exist and they're in those waters. Never thought about it before. Whereas now it's one of the at least vague criteria that I'll consider before getting in somewhere.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know if it's changed since I got older. I'm English, so I came to Australia and felt somewhat just afraid of sharks anyway. But I used to do a lot of triathlons and long swims and things, so I kind of just ignore it.
You've been
ignoring the race.
Yeah. Exactly. You've been desensitized over time. Yeah, maybe I should have been more cautious to begin with, but mine's just happened as I've gotten a bit older and I realize I'm not immortal.
Yeah. But I think being alone in a dark ocean at 5:30 in the morning, it's hard to get rid of it. Like, you see shadows and you see, like, the other day I came up to take a breath and I looked over, and like maybe a few meters away from me it turned out it was a cormorant, but it was kind of like just orthogonal to me like this. So it looked like this tiny black fin just jutting up from the water, and I was just like,
That's sketchy. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So have you had to figure out if you can walk on water to run back to shore, or?
Yeah. I was about to. Yeah.
Indeed. All right. Well, might as well jump into some Bitcoin stuff. So yes. I guess what I tend to do on this podcast is get people to tell their origin stories, I guess, is to how they got into Bitcoin, any momentous people, books, moments in their life or in history that have led them to that. And then obviously you're transitioning into a Bitcoin focused role with Bitcoin for Humans. And so we could talk a bit about that as well, challenges, successes, and vision for it. But rather than get you to remember all that, I'll kind of prompt you. So maybe you just start at your personal journey. Like what got you into Bitcoin initially?
Yeah. So I'd say about 5 years ago, I decided to give up on my corporate career. I've always had a bit of a bent for giving up on corporate careers. I was about that close. And what happened was I was looking for a big problem to solve, because I was told that's what you do when you go and start a startup. So I thought, all right, I want to have a go at poverty. Like, which bit of poverty shall I look at? And I thought, right, well, education seems like it'd be a good lever to help with poverty. So maybe there's a way of providing more education. And I knew a guy who'd similarly left a lot of the big corporate stuff over here and gone and started a charity where he was building schools out in Cambodia and then providing all of this sort of great digital feedback around here's the school being built, here's the kids going into the school. And I thought, this is good, and they're operating on low margins and getting stuff done and making a difference. I wonder if I can get funding to them. And I came up with this idea of an application that I'd called Karma Pay that I started to build, which was like a payment system where you would go, you load a card onto it, you go into a cafe or whatever, and you buy your stuff. But every time you make a purchase, we take not the profit, but the revenue split of the fee that we took, and then we fund that directly over to the guys in Cambodia into a specific school. And then we track all of that on our end, and we say, okay, well, here's where all of the money that you're spending, here's where it goes. And the idea was that it was to drive this really good positive feedback loop in the individual to just say, oh, I had a long Mac. Like, oh, look, it's building this school. Like, oh, wow, it's got funded. Like, wow, it's being built. Like, here's some kids running into it. Fuck, like that's quite incredible. I might just use this from now on. And the idea is to like make it almost a no-brainer as to, well, why would you use anything else? And it was in building that I kind of got interested in the idea of Bitcoin and blockchain. Sorry to say it, but that's sort of where it came from.
I think we all did that, yeah, because for a while I was telling people, I think it's blockchain, not Bitcoin specifically. I think some of these other cryptos might have something to them. That was a few years ago now, but I think we all did that to some degree.
We all learn. Yeah, so my interest was probably like less about money, but more about the idea that in my head, this was going to work. It was just like a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't anybody want to do this? It has such a good impact in the world. Like, people would be foolish not to adopt it. And I was like, I'm going to have this massive audit problem. So it would be great to hold like a record of what's going on in a visible manner that can't be tampered with. And so that's why I was kind of interested in Bitcoin and blockchain and various things. And people say, oh, you should be looking at Bitcoin for the payments. And I was like, no, that just sounds like it adds tons of friction. So I'll ignore it at the time. Yeah, and I was kind of curious from the point of view of like, well, how do I audit all of this stuff? But the more I was dealing with the guys in Cambodia, the more it seemed like useful to be able to just get them the money directly across there and automate all the payment flows. And it was easier than working with the banking system. And one of the main reasons this business kind of collapsed on itself was just the fees that we were getting charged by the payment providers, the chargeback issues that we were having. Like, to try and scale it, I was going to bankrupt myself. So I was like, right, well, I'm just going to have to let this go for a while until we can find a better payment solution. And this was around the time that Lightning was sort of coming on the scene. And I thought, oh, well, that sounds promising. So I'll park it for a while and see what we're going to do. But it got me interested in the space. And then the more I'd looked into, at the time, it was originally Ethereum that I was like looking to build a lot of this stuff on. But it was so a lot of my background is in IT and consulting and enterprise architecture and things like this. And the more I looked at Ethereum, the more it just looked like nonsense as a platform on which to build something that mattered. Like, it just, the costs for the transaction layers were just like, why would you bake that in to something? And I started to move to this model of like, well, why wouldn't I just take a lot of the code off chain, and then all I really need is the money? And then I started thinking about Bitcoin. And then I had to, as I said, the company at the time was starting to, I realized it wasn't going to scale easily and I needed to do something else. So I decided to move back into the corporate world for a while and put some money back on the balance sheet. So as I was doing that, I remember I was building a deck at the back of my house, and I started listening to podcasts, which were new. And because I started getting into Bitcoin, I listened to Tales from the Crypt because it came up. And then there's a particular day that I remember I was leaving out my back gate. I think I was going to go and get some lunch. And Marty Bent was having a little rant, as he often did. And he just kept talking about sound money. And there was something about it that I was like, why? It felt like I felt like ashamed almost. I was like, why am I in my mid-30s and I don't know what that is? And I remember like Googling it and thinking, okay, well, I'm going to look into this. And like, that was the start of the whole thing, because it was just, why would I not want sound money? Like, if you listen to it and you say, oh, I could have sound money, or I could have unsound money. I don't think I want the unsound money. It seems important. I should go after this sound money thing. Like, the the way I equate it when I'm talking to people is usually like, if somebody said to you, "Oh, you got to go up on the roof now. I've got two ladders for you. I've got a sound ladder and I've got an unsound ladder. Like, which ladder do you want to use?" You just think, well, the sound ladder, because I'm not a psychopath. Like, what are you talking about? Like, why would I ever want to use the unsound anything? That sounds crazy. And so I think as soon as that was like incepted in my head, that was almost all it took. Like, and then it was just a case of over the next 9 months going, that's what sound money is. And then everything just flowed on from that moment, really. So it was the context to get me there, to listen to the podcast, and then bam, sound money.
And it sounds like you were primed through various stages of life. And like from what you were saying, some of that, the earlier work that you were doing in Cambodia and even moving on from the corporate job, I feel like I can kind of relate to that, where some of those corporate roles are good fiat mining. They're good to get some fiat on the balance sheet to then be able to do other things. But it feels a little bit soulless after a while. And also there's much less autonomy in there. And if you can see that there's something wrong with the world, even if you don't know exactly what that is, it doesn't feel like you're actually doing anything about it. And I can't remember the name of the person who quoted this or said this, but something like, what's the most important thing that you could be working on in the world right now? And if you're not doing that, why is that? And what are the barriers and how do you overcome that? Because I think that's when we actually really self-actualize. We really enjoy ourselves, not always enjoyment, but we get more meaning out of it. And then we get to disrupt that cycle, because looking at poverty, it's probably one of the clearest inroads, I think, to Bitcoin, isn't it? Where you can see, okay, so something's wrong with people not having enough money in certain, countries, and there's lots of different ways you could try to attack that. And it could be political, it could be about specifically the money, which is Bitcoin's approach. But education is a huge one. Like I studied economics, and even though I think most of it's sort of trash, one of the things that I do recall was saying that to disrupt poverty, to disrupt that cycle of poverty, we need education. Obviously, the type of education that they were suggesting in these economics courses was not the kind of education that we needed, and it kind of just enriches the few humanitarian organizations that are going over there rather than enriching the people themselves. So you went about it in a much better way, trying to say, how do we educate people? How do we kind of let people see where their money is going, and make that more transparent? And obviously, that's kind of led you quite clearly to Bitcoin and primed you with that too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I was quite the anarcho-capitalist at the time, maybe these days, but there was very much a view of thinking like, oh, I think this could be I used to think of it as like an engineering solution to the problem, but you could say it would just be like a free market solution of saying, I would look at the UN and go through the books and you say, okay, well, if like $100 billion of funding, like what hits the ground, and it's $1 billion.
Yeah.
So you've got 99% like capital destruction. This is insane. And you think it's really just down to the fact that like that's kind of like what hierarchical organizations do, is that they give you some certainty in the output, but they kind of destroy a lot of efficiency in the way. Whereas markets are really good for just getting somewhere very efficiently, but you've got no idea what they're going to do because it's an expression of all the people in the market. And I thought, well, maybe this could be more of like a free market version that could compete, and we could see like what's the better way to distribute aid. And my assumption was like it's got to be better to just give aid to people directly than it is to try and form a group and then get that group to go and lobby somebody, and then get that person that's being lobbied to then lobby somebody else to then get some money given to this supranational organization, then get them to give it to somebody else, to somebody else, to somebody else, to somebody else, and then now Dave gets it. It's like Dave's going to get a lot less. Can we just give Dave like $10?
And Dave generally knows what he needs to spend it on to enrich his life to some extent, as long as he's been educated, properly in quotations, because what that means exactly, anyone could kind of have different opinions about. But it's back to that Austrian economic stuff, isn't it, where all value is subjective. So there is no way for a central planner to say, oh, look, this person that I've never met, this community that I've never been to, I can figure out what they're probably going to need. And of course, you're right, the inefficiencies of getting money there to then say, well, 99% of it we're going to lose or enrich ourselves, or sign up contracts with our own, private sector organizations. And you wouldn't run a small business that way. I get as organizations get larger and as they get more state controlled, they tend to be run that way very inefficiently. But you wouldn't run a small business in that manner. You wouldn't say, I'm putting in, $100,000 and I'm actually only going to get about $1,000 of efficient utility out of that money. It just wouldn't work. You go like, this is a fail. Like, it's going to end badly. But we keep trying to do that.
Interestingly, it's exactly how we run large businesses. Like we would never run small businesses like this, but we run massive businesses like this all the time. I think it's crazy. I think the only reason that they exist is because they can in a cheap debt world. And like that's the trick is being big, you get cheaper debt and you just fund yourself through the debt as opposed to actually having to provide something useful to the world. So I do feel like there's a bottom-up revolution that needs to happen.
I agree, because it's just about more and more leverage for larger organizations, isn't it? It's like who can loan the most, squeeze out their competition and corner more of the market, and then loan even more and continue up. And I mean, if you ever get to a point of economic bust time, it's okay, because at that stage, you're too big to fail. The government will bail you out. You can pay out your executives a decent bonus, and then the whole thing, the merry-go-round continues.
Yeah, it's easy to make money when you can't lose.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can just socialize the losses. Yeah. It's really interesting to me as well that you what really made it click. Firstly, Tales from the Crypt, Marty Bent, Matt Odell, probably my favorite podcasters. They really got me to understand that it's Bitcoin only. So I feel like I went through maybe a similar journey to you, and just the what is money, like the answer to that question, and realizing it's about sound money or hard money. And once you realize money is just meant to be a representation of our time, and our time is the most scarce resource that we have, and then you start to think, well, you'd want that to be somewhat equivalent. And so if it's easy to get, if it's unsound and can fall apart or deteriorate, that doesn't sound like the thing that I want to represent my time and energy. I feel like I need something harder. I need something stricter. So the what is money is just a really great thing to come back to. I think sometimes we get very complicated with Bitcoin as we get further into it, but just bringing it back to that basics and knowing that that's where most of us got into it from as well, I think is important to highlight.
Well, I mean, it comes to, I know one of your questions you often like to ask is around like orange pilling strategies. And I think you're like the sort of, I think a lot of Bitcoiners we're kind of like the dog with two dicks sort of analogy, right? Like we're just desperate to talk to people about Bitcoin, and we've got about 5 years or more of learning in our heads that we just like, I need to get this out like onto something. Like as soon as somebody has like just a little bit of interest, it's kind of hard to not just pour it all forth. And I think in that enthusiasm, it's hard to like stop yourself, put yourself in their shoes and go, I wonder what they know. Because, you look back at where you might have been several years ago before Bitcoin and you go, yeah, I didn't know anything. Like, I just took all that for granted. I took that for granted. I would have exactly thought that. I wouldn't have questioned that. I wouldn't have thought about this. And it's weird.
Absolutely. And you're right, because I think we love all the depth. We love all the profound cosmic stuff, all the tendrils that, come out from Bitcoin, and it can improve the world in so many just incredible ways. But you're right. When you're talking to someone who has none of that assumed knowledge and you're trying to then download about 5 years of experience, it's not going to happen. And you're going to be way over their head, or it's going to seem, I don't know, kind of insulting in some ways. And I think, like I recall in the episode I did with the chief Bitcoin officer of Perth Heat, and I thought he's probably going to have some outrageous way of convincing, a board to bring this onto the balance sheet, to accept it as their pay and to pay their staff with it. There must be something really profound in there that he's mentioned. And it was just explaining what money is, spending, a good 30 minutes to get past that initial assumed knowledge. And at that point, the rest of it, like I'm sure there's still sticking points at times, but the rest of it flows relatively easily because everyone's pretty much on the same page to say, well, we can all agree that our current money is not really money. It's a currency, and it's not sound, it's not hard, and therefore isn't a good representation of our time and energy. Now let's talk about what comes next. Like once you're at that point, I feel like people would be more open to it. And so, I guess it just makes sense to simplify it sometimes from that orange pill perspective and meet people, halfway or even a bit closer to where they're at.
So I see it like a dance. It's like you kind of have to like, you're dancing around a little bit until you can figure out, well, what's the hook that they know? It's, oh, you know this one. Okay, well, we'll do this dance now. Now we know that. But originally you just need to figure out, well, what do you care about? What do you know? Is it that you dislike? Like I often talk about it as anti-corruption money. And so look, if you've got, there's some questions that you could ask, like, do you want the corrupt money or the uncorrupt money? Or do you want the money that's controlled by like 6 white guys that meet in Basel like every few months, or the one that nobody controls? Like, which one sounds better? It's just, the sound one or the unsound one.
I think you have to put it on those, like, in that way sometimes, even though it kind of seems a bit funny to put it that way, or it sounds a bit outrageous, because it is outrageous and it is kind of hilarious that we have a system that works that way. But I recall, like, a thought that pops up talking about this is listening to Jerome Powell, and whenever he's talking about whether the rates are going to go up or down, and you've got like the whole world watching, you've got all the markets watching to then determine, do we sell or do we buy? Do we feel comfortable or not? What's this one white guy say about what's going to happen with the money? And you think, what an outrageous system. Just 8 billion people in the world, so much complicated dynamics between them all. And it's all coming down to what this one person says in this, Tuesday morning meeting about the money over the next few weeks. It's just, insane. But you got to put it at that level sometime. Like, do you want that one person or those 6 people making the decision over coffee every month? Or do you want the one that's a little bit more dynamic, that takes into account everyone's subjective experience of, what is valuable?
Yeah. And because I sort of think this is, in my mind, what drives a lot of what I want to do is, I think the problem in the world is that we've given up on community. Like the answer to the question of there's one guy that's driving stuff is it's all about scale, if you know what I mean. So when I look at the world, I go, do I think that, like, say, governments are good or bad? I have a view on that. It's not that they're necessarily good. But I think chiefly their problem is in scale. A government that's very local to me is going to respond much better to my requirements than a government that's very far away from me. Not necessarily true as I sit here in WA right now with our particular state leadership, but you get where I'm going. So I think there is something about a lot of the problems you see are at scale. Like we had a discussion at the VR, the Australian Down Under VR meetup the other week about banks. And I said, look, I'm pro Bitcoin bank, but I'm pro Bitcoin bank because I don't think a Bitcoin bank is like a current bank. I think when we've got 4 banks in Australia that are all super corrupt and getting away with it, I think that's bad. I think when we've got 100,000 banks in Australia that are all operating at a community level and doing, local capital allocation and investments back into the community, I think that's going to be very good. And I think that's the sort of bank that we're going to build on top of Bitcoin. I think the same with government. I think the same with most institutions we build, like schooling and education. Education is clearly good. We want to be educated, but it's not necessarily that great if we just have one thing that we have to educate every child in the whole world about, like maybe there is some diversity and approach there where you're going to get a better outcome. So I think scale is the issue, and we just need to pull everything down, decentralize institutions, and I think we'll be lovely and nice to each other at that point.
Definitely. And it reminds me of the sovereign individual thesis, where as we do become more decentralized and there is more microprocessing occurring, rather than having all of your employment, say, in one organization, or all of your, what am I thinking here, like your resources in one locality under one jurisdiction, it would probably be small dictatorships potentially, which are like local councils that have a bit more authority than what they would now, but you would have the opportunity to go between them. So, geopolitical arbitrage. But of course, having smaller government, so you're right, that scale lets them really focus on what is the culture, what is the problem, what is the potential solutions that we have, and what's our budget to deal with it more appropriately, rather than diffusing it over much larger scale. There is a psychological concept called the diffusion of responsibility, where the more people are involved in a problem, the less responsible those people feel. Whereas if you have less people, you have more people willing to actually put their hand up and say, well, I know something that could help here, or I'll give it a try anyway. So I think I agree with you there. Like, I kind of I do sometimes have a bit of an on and off switch in the way that I view things. And I don't think government is great, but at the same time, I think it could be if we have the right sort of format and they have the right kind of responsibilities. And now, having heard you say that, the right kind of scale as well is really important.
Yeah. Oh, look, I mean, if there was a button over there, the Rothbardian big red button to get rid of the state, if I didn't trip up on the way to it, I might break my hand pushing it. But
but what would happen with the roads? What about all the roads?
I think it would be fine.
I think it would be fine too, yeah.
What I would say is that if you just gave me a non-corrupt government that wasn't on the take and was just very efficiently spending money, then I wouldn't be running over there quite as fast. So what I often like to say to friends who would call me out on this, I say, look, it's just that I'm anti-corruption and it comes across as anti-government.
It's true. It's all about, self-interest and corruption. And if we could remove those things reliably, then government, any organization, would be amazing. However,
scale plays into that, right? It's just the more you incentivize it, either through like a very large company, a very large government, it doesn't matter. It's like whatever the institution, you make it big enough, then you really incentivize that person to be a corrupt motherfucker at the top.
Yeah.
I think we find.
I heard, I think it was Robert Breedlove, who's done some kind of corrupt things in his own right in the past, but I think maybe he's made up for that. I don't know. I think we've forgiven him, it looks like, on Bitcoin Twitter. However, he made a point that there is no such thing as natural morals or natural ethics. In fact, those things just formulate based on the game that we're playing and the rules that we're within. And so if we're allowed to, just to put it simply, print money, siphon it to stocks or assets or a company that we own or a company that our friend owns, if we're allowed to do those things, why wouldn't we? Like most people would. It's just a matter of like an evolutionary imperative to go to, follow the path of least resistance in a way that's going to give you the most amount of resources. We'd be crazy not to do that. So you're right. Like if we could remove corruption and self-interest, that would be great. But unfortunately, the rules of the game tend to, make the corrupt motherfuckers rise to the top or turn them that way once they're there.
I refer to this, I think there is an article on Bitcoin for Humans about this, but I used to refer to it as the Lord of the Rings fallacy or the Aragorn fallacy. It's the one where you go, oh, well, it'll all be fine when the good king comes back. It's just the steward who's bad. And it's like, nah, the world doesn't work like that. I think this is one of what's his face? The Game of Thrones guy, like one of his
George R.R. Martin.
Yeah, that's the guy. I try not to think about him too much because I started reading those books and then now I'm never going to see the end of it, unfortunately.
Same.
I think one of his critiques of Tolkien was always like, no, he lives in this like fairy tale fantasy world where there's the good person and the bad person. And as long as the good person's there, you get 1,000 years of grace. Whereas actually politics is a lot dirtier than that. And you've got to look at the incentives and the power plays and who's doing what. But I mean, to me, the answer is just the smaller, less incentivized it is for the corruption, the less corruption there will be. You're not going to get rid of it, but anything we can do to scale without bigger institutions is going to be good. And I think Bitcoin is about the highest leverage thing that you could do there is to take the money out of the picture. And once that lever of control is gone, I think society is going to naturally get smaller, which I think is a wonderful thing.
I agree with that. And again, it takes away a lot of that corrupt power. People can still have power if they've earned it and they've built the resources and they employ them in like an efficient manner and rather than to misallocate them. And Bitcoin facilitates that. And it's frustrating sometimes to see that people are still on the very old narrative of, it's left versus right, or it's once my guy or girl gets in, then it's all going to be better. And it's actually the person that's created the problems. Bitcoin and then understanding more about Austrian economics and libertarianism has made me realize like there's an up and down, there's a vertical line there as well. And that one's really important. You know, are we more trying to enrich the state or are we more about our individual liberties, freedoms, property? And once you start seeing it on that axis, I guess you could say, the whole left and right thing just becomes noise. The whole who's the person that's in power becomes noise. And the signal is, how do we kind of get some of our own rights back? And I think you're right. It's got to do with scale and it's got to do with that thing at the root of it all, which is money.
So what might be quite surprising is that is a reasonable segue into to why I started doing the Bitcoin for Humans stuff and what the plan is. So as I said, I think my view is that the thing that we're missing is sort of community. I think I won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but I think like when we stopped with religion was a bit of a cause of this, not necessarily because I'm a religious person, but I think when we removed that from society, we also removed the going to a big room once a week, looking people in the face and going, "You're right, you're right, you're right, yeah, I'm all right, yeah, you good now." Oh, Dave's feeling a bit down. All right, well, let's help Dave because we're people, and that's what people do when given that opportunity. And I think we need to look at how we can start rebuilding local institutions. And so, particularly, I think that banking will play a part in this because I think banking has played a part in destroying a lot of those local institutions. In that, when you've got this massive flood of sort of fiat money and like just money printing that's coming in at the top end, I think it actually makes capital allocation very difficult in the sense that, so I've been having this conversation with a mentor of mine in Perth for many years around, how we can get community level banking and exchange platforms up and running. But, we'd always describe the problem of like, look, if you've got $1 billion and you need to allocate it out, it's very hard to give $10,000 to like a cafe. Like it's just not going to happen. What you're going to be looking for is, well, I've got $1 billion, so I need to give it to, the people. I want 10 buckets of 100 million, or I want 20 buckets of 50 million, sort of thing. And then it goes like down and down and down, and everyone's taking their management slice along the way. And so you just end up in these like large, like over-geared investments that are deemed safe. And I just think that's the wrong way for capital to flow through society. Like what I'd like to see is a lot more people investing back into their local communities, and in particular into cash flow businesses and things that make money, as opposed to all the money coming from the top and just being against a wall, for lack of a better word. And so what I think we need to build is like, well, what's the institutions that actually help us get there? And I think that's local community Bitcoin banks. And I think it's banks that then do the sort of free things that I'd like to see in a bank. So, how do you facilitate some of the payments? How do you help people with savings and custody? And then how do you help people with capital formation and exchange and investments? And so one of the things that I am probably most excited in is probably like the capital formation and investments. Like I think Bitcoin offers a very interesting proposition to small business, which is that usually businesses look like one of two sort of patterns. You've got the revenue neutral businesses that are all about just hyper growth. And it's just like, how do I plow money into this thing? And I know I'm losing money every year until I hockey stick. And now I've made loads of money on my capital. And like, that's your big VC view of like what we're going to do. And then you've got like the local business, which is all about, I'm just going to work hard and sweat away, and I've got a cash flow, but growth is hard. If you're a plumber, you can do all right. It's kind of difficult to be the plumber that then gets to be 10 plumbers, 20 plumbers, running a big plumbing empire sort of thing. So I think there's a problem in like, how do you satisfy the growth component of that to compete against, the VC funded plumbing platform, which is then going to try and take all your business. And so what I think what Bitcoin can do, and in particular, when I started looking at the concept of like Bitcoin treasuries after Saylor came out, and it not really occurred. I think I heard Preston Pish talking about it a little bit beforehand in his, but as soon as you realize like, oh, if you can make money doing anything and you can put some of that cash flow into Bitcoin, like then over time you get the hockey stick growth, because that's the growth profile of the treasury reserve that you're keeping, not necessarily the business. And then as that goes up, well, that opens up new opportunities for you as a businessman to do something. So it starts to free up your time. You're not just, on that constant treadmill of like debt and problems that you're looking to grow. And I think one of the best examples of this is probably like Steve Barber and what he's been doing with with upstream data, isn't it? Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
I always look at this guy as like almost like the Hank. Yeah, he's like the Hank Reardon of Bitcoin. Like he's just building shit and not caring. But I think when he describes it, they had like they hired a fab shop originally so he could produce the hash huts, and then he bought the fab shop, took over that business because he was keeping a Bitcoin treasury and Bitcoin went up. And I think at the moment he's now talking about like, oh well, we can start buying like wellheads and we'll just do like a fully integrated stack of going gas to Bitcoin. And you think, wow, like how could you ever have done that if you were just, in a fab shop making buildings and you didn't have this attached growth profile? And so a lot of my time at the moment is like looking at, okay, well, what are where's the market? Because I talk to a lot of Bitcoiners who've become aware of this. I think since Saylor's done it, with Preston Pish talking about it and others, and we're all going, can I go and buy a business that creates cash flow? I can just get like a business loan to do that. And then I just cash flow like the profits into Bitcoin. And then it's just people, it's like, I almost refer to it as like service mining. It's like, what's a service I could start that creates money, and the money just goes to Bitcoin. And then I just remove some of the risk for myself of generating that Bitcoin over time. And then that's my growth profile.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense because that is what money is meant to be, isn't it? It's about removing the barter system, allowing people to specialize and do the thing that they're good at, but that the population needs. And as long as they can keep saving money that either stays the same value or accrues in value, they can expand that way by having an asset that is, again, holding its value or accruing in value. It doesn't mean that they need to take on more and more debt to be able to service it. It means that they don't need to go be good at the casino or the pseudo casino, like playing the stocks and property, and then needing to understand technical analysis and all the geopolitical machinations. Like that takes you away from your specialty, that takes you away from the service industry that generates cash flow and gives the community what it needs. So just like by having hard money that you save in, it lets you have a whole different mindset for how to operate a business.
Definitely. And I don't think most small businesses, particularly the ones that I talk to, it's not like they're all off playing the stock market with their reserves. It's just the reserves of cash at best. Like at that level, you're not doing anything overly fancy. It's just, it never appreciates in any way. And so I just think it's such almost like a no-brainer where you can go, well, what if you could just plug in, it doesn't have to be a whole reserve. Obviously you need working capital, but here's something that you could do. I think there's a market to be made here as well, because I actually think that there's a lot of Bitcoiners that want to buy into that sort of business and get a SATS dividend at the back end, if you know what I mean. And I think you can facilitate all of that on Bitcoin Rails. So that's one area that I'm really interested in exploring under Bitcoin for Humans. Particularly like the long run view of Bitcoin for Humans is that I really want to like look into this concept of like, well, how do you revitalize communities around the financial institutions that we need in a sort of bottom-up community? And I think it makes sense to build that on Bitcoin. So I think one aspect of that is that sort of capital formation of like, how do we get people investing into cash flow positive things right now that drive Bitcoin dividends at the back end, and then spreading that money around the various parties that are involved. So I think that's one aspect. Another one is helping people with custody and savings. And another one is around payments. But now this is like my longer term vision. Like when I actually look at the market right now and say, well, what's the problem that we've got? Is I think most people know about Bitcoin and they know that they should think it's important and they should know about it more. But then they go, oh, I will look on YouTube. And what they're met with on YouTube is just like such a hyperbolic, scammy mess that they just go, oh, and they're either like sickened, frightened, or they end up going down some sort of bullshit shitcoin rabbit hole. Like it's just there's loads of noise, and it's lots of hyperbole, lots of empty promises, lots of people pointing at pictures of things going up or going down or moons or all of this sort of thing. And I think as a first point, I'm like, I can't build this like Bitcoin institution now because the people aren't there. So one of my learnings from trying to do the Karma Pay stuff was like, look, all right, Pete, you thought it was a great idea and you assumed it was going to be a slam dunk. But it turns out you're an egotistical motherfucker who is drinking your own Kool-Aid. And maybe what you need to do is listen more to what people will pay for it and what price. Because my problem is I just couldn't do it for the price that people would engage with it. And therefore, to cross that chasm, it just wasn't going to work. And particularly the way I wanted to fund it which was without any VC investment inside there. And so I was like, right, this time I need to listen better. I need to go where the people are. And so I thought, well, no matter what I end up building, and I'll do it under I want to build these things, but I'm going to do it under the direction of what people really want. The first thing I need to do is I need to start engaging where they are, and where they are is they're just scared. So step one is, can we take some of the fear out of Bitcoin? And could we almost like create a Bitcoiner pipeline? And then once we've got our Bitcoiner pipeline, then we can build this world of services for them, which is where it's really going to pay off. But I think you need this Bitcoiner pipeline that goes, I'm kind of interested in Bitcoin. Oh, I'll listen to this guy. He seems nice. Oh, he's not scamming me. Fantastic. I've bought some Bitcoin. I don't even know what shit coins are. Apparently they're shit. Like, do I want the shit coin or the not shit coin? Oh, seems obvious, right? And I think you need that pipeline. Like, I mean, I'm less into the idea of trying to convert people that are really into crypto, because you've got to like get them, you got to pull them back, like miles down the street to where they would have been when they first heard about it, and then start the work on them, if that makes sense.
It does.
New, you can just go, have you ever noticed how the world's fucked? And they just go, it is, isn't it? Let me show you why.
It's so true. Like, there is, I hate to use these terms because they've got their own cultural meaning now, but fake news and misinformation, there's just a lot of it out there. And like, are you aware of what an eclipse attack is in the Bitcoin space or nodes? Yeah. So it's like everyone is, most people, if they're going to YouTube and they're looking up things like crypto or even just searching for Bitcoin, they are being presented with so much information to the contrary to push them towards shitcoins or other things that they're under an eclipse attack. And it's very, very difficult then to move your way out of that, because if you've got all these what seems like reliable and credible sources telling you that something else is going to go to the moon and Bitcoin's too slow, or I can't scale, or I can't do smart contracts or whatever else, it's going to be very difficult, to convince those people to undo some of that that scaffolding that's been put in place. And you're right, it's talking to people that have no introduction to it yet, and coming at it from an angle that they can perhaps relate to, like, the world is fucked, or what do you think money is? Okay, this is my impression of what money is. And all of a sudden now you're starting to talk the same language. You've identified a problem, they're aware of it, and now they're naturally trying to seek out solutions or trying to seek out a way to, well, how do I make that a bit better? And Bitcoin just fits in there really well.
Yeah, so that's how I've ended up with starting with like the blog and the articles and the YouTube videos that I've been doing. And I don't feel like I'm in any way suited to do it. Like, I'm bad at prepping stuff when it comes to videos and talking. Like, I'll sit down and I'll write out a structure for what I want to do, and then I'll go, take it till record, blah. Just kind of go for it. But I thought, well, what I think people really need in that space, if it's all just scams and hyperbole, is you actually do want somebody just honestly telling you stuff. Now, I don't think I've quite yet found like my proper voice of like, what am I going to pitch and where, and like, where's the structure that this hangs in, so it's going to make more sense to then for people to navigate it. But I assume I'd figure that out on the way. But yeah, that's why I'm starting over here.
I think that's the best way to take it, is just put something out there and let the market give you the feedback that you need. And also, if you're like me, you probably have a strong inner critic anyway. So if you listen to any of those things back, you'll pick up on things that you can improve upon next time, regardless of what the market says to you. So I think taking that approach of like, just put something out there, be genuine about it. don't structure it too much, but provide enough structure where you're not putting in like 10 different topics. That's sort of what I've learned over time. And obviously, I'm very, very new to the podcasting Bitcoin education space, but I did a lot of educational work in the last decade or so of my career. And what I found over time was I enjoyed the interactions more when I didn't over prepare. The recipient seemed to get far more out of it because it was actually more of an engaging, dynamic conversation. And I could actually target, where their train of thought was. And it takes less preparation time as well. So it just becomes this much more efficient way of doing it. I think maybe you over prepare to start with, as you just start to like drum in the facts, drum in the analogies or the metaphors or the potential FUD or questions that people might have. And that's good stuff to prepare around. But I think once you've done that a few times, you're right. You just let it happen naturally and dynamically, because that's probably what most people need is something that's genuine and organic, not too structured, not too, formalized or cram it in their face. I think it's just do it naturally.
I think the bit where I'm landing is that it's the kind of parallel world sort of model where it's like, look, I'm going to talk to you about something that's bad and is obviously bad, and you're going to look at it and go, yeah, that's bad. And then I'm going to point out that Bitcoin isn't like that and it's like this. And they go, oh, that's great. I didn't know. I'll take that version. And it comes back to those like binary questions we were talking about earlier around, the sound, unsound, the corrupt, the uncorrupt, the controlled, the not controlled. Like, I think when you can get people to understand like the water that they're swimming in and then say, but here's some clean water. And they go, oh, thank God. I thought I was going to have to work for that, but like you gave me a problem and then an answer. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I'm just going to go with the answer.
That's right.
Yeah.
And sometimes even just highlighting the fact that they're in water, like you're probably, that might be where that thought even comes from, of the whole, like the two fish swimming, the older fish swims by and says, how's the water today? And they keep swimming and they look at each other and say like, what the hell is water? And I think sometimes people don't realize like money is something that we haven't paid attention to. Our time is something that we don't always pay attention to. So bringing it back to those things helps people realize there is a system here. And even if I don't care about it, it kind of cares about me. It influences me. So maybe I should pay a bit more attention to it.
There is, I can't remember where I heard this, but or watched it. I was probably on a podcast, but it was somebody talking about the idea that if you were just left in the woods for 30 years with an axe, you could make yourself like a really nice house, with all that time, maybe even over a couple of years. But yet, in the modern world, with the complete division of labor that we've got, to go and buy a house and pay off the debt is going to take you 30 years. And it's like, why is it that with all that division of labor, why would it be probably quicker for me just to go out into the woods and build the thing by hand? That doesn't make any sense. And you think there's something wrong there with just the way we approach debt and like what we do to ourselves. I mean, this was like a story like a few years ago. This is probably what led to me leaving work again. This time was we were on a family holiday. It was like just pre-COVID, and like this is why I've got such nice memories of this holiday. The grandparents were over, the kids were taken care of. There was a lot of just lazily sipping coffee from a deck looking out into the forest as all the kangaroos were like jumping past. It was very Australian. And like one evening we were playing this card game where you had these questions you'd ask about your life in various ways. And one of the ones that my wife asked me was just, what's the thing you're most disappointed about in your life? And I gave like a real like bullshit non-answer that I just didn't know. And then I still went to bed, got up the next day, went back, was sat drinking coffee on the deck. And I looked at it and said, oh, I'm sorry, I gave you that like really bad answer, but it's not that. Like, it's been sat in my head overnight. And I think the thing is, I'm really disappointed that I can't remember the age, but mid-30s, whatever. And I'm basically a slave. It's like we're in this position where I have to do this stuff and I don't like it. I don't necessarily respect what I'm doing, but we're just sort of doing it. And I know we're kind of working our way out of that at the moment, but that's it. That's the thing that's most disappointing in my life. And what really gets me is the idea that I might be building the same track for the kids And it's that moment where you go, fuck, like, because I'm here because, I went to school, and at school they said, if you do good, you do this. So I did that, and I did all right at that. And they went, oh, if you do that, you do this. And so I went, oh, okay, well, I'll do that. And I realized I'd been on this sort of treadmill for 30 plus years before, like initially, like quitting corporate life previously, where I was like, yeah, I had that moment. I always refer to it as it's the 30s to 50s bullshit moment. And you see it in men all over the place. Often it is around the time you have kids where you just go, this is all bollocks. Like, it's all bullshit.
Is this it? Is this all that's left? Is this what I'm meant to be doing, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like one of the big reveals for me was, it should have struck me earlier, but it's when you have kids, you realize that all the stuff you thought as a kid about your own dad was made up, in that way that you go, oh, I always assumed he knew everything because he was a dad. I remember ringing my dad and just being like, yeah, I just literally always assumed you know everything. I don't know why it's not occurred to me before now that clearly you didn't. You didn't even have the internet. You had that stack of encyclopedias in the dining room. Fuck, like, what could you have known? And he was like, yeah, we were just winging it, And I think when like that gets revealed, you go, oh, and you can start to look around the world and just be like, yeah, nobody knows what the fuck is going on around here. Everyone's just having a crack and trying not to get into too much trouble. And the world makes a lot more sense, I think, when you see that. But you also start to look at your own. I mean, I was a management consultant doing project management in capital projects and stuff over here. And you go, a lot of this is moving PowerPoint boxes around and changing colors, and then moving figures around in spreadsheets and changing colors, so that I can tell the story of the work that's being done, often by other people. It's kind of like, am I adding something? Like, in the right project, maybe, but Perth is one of those places that's overfunded for what it does. So there is a lot of very well-paid people doing stuff that will never see the light of day, and it'll just get thrown away after a couple of years, or it's just complete capital misallocation. It's rife over here. There's just so much money came from the mining boom. There were so few people around. It just crazy.
Just shuffling paper around. And look, I worked in government before getting into psychology, to work on a project sometimes for 6 or 12 months, and then a minister changes or the department gets restructured, and it's like, all right, no, we're just going to shelve that. Maybe we'll come back to it in 5 or 10 years. We're going to work on this other project instead. I think the amount of time that's gone into that is just incredible. And so, I mean, I think something else that you were saying there as well, that the 30s to 50s, like realizing everything is kind of bollocks, and looking around and seeing that everyone else is kind of doing things out of a bit of like peer pressure from people that died sometimes hundreds of years ago, because we just feel like this is what we're meant to do, because this is what my parents did and this is what their parents seem to do. And I reckon that like we've been sold, well, either by design or through just natural organic, we've led this way as a human civilization, but we've been sold milestones as a bit of a lie, where it's like, okay, you got to get through primary school, then you got to get through secondary school, and then you got to go to maybe university or do a trade or something along those lines, and then you got to get your first job, then you got to get your first promotion, and then you got to start saving for a house. And it's like, we have all these milestones, and the way that we are as goal-oriented species is we look towards that end goal, and we're like, my life will be better when I get there. I'll feel good when I get there. I'll feel, accomplished when I get there. And most of these milestones are very anticlimactic. Or I think when you get to like 30s, 40s, 50s, at least this is what happened to me. It dawned on me of like, that's rubbish. I don't want to keep doing that over and over and over again. There's like a cycle here. And sure, I should have goals and I should celebrate when I achieve them, but I should be more focused on making my everyday, like my day-to-day routine, the things that I'm kind of putting out to the community and getting back from people, make that the thing that I'm passionate about. And sometimes it just, it is finding some freedom, some autonomy, and targeting something that you know is going to have meaning to the community. And then you can enjoy the journey as well, which is very cliche, but I think it's cliche probably for a very good reason. Don't put everything in the destination, because once you get there, you realize there's just another destination that you have to start going towards after that anyway.
Yeah, like, I think the big takeaway was when I was just like, look, I've just done all of this on autopilot, and it made no sense. I was just doing it. I think luckily I'd managed to kind of, the particular ladder I was on in consulting, I sort of got to the top director level like in my early 30s, that it hit me early enough that I was like, oh, I thought you were kind of like done at this point. And I was just staring down. I think particularly we were looking at housing, and I was like, right, am I going to buy like a big house that's going to be something I live in forever and I literally can't stop work? Or do we buy a small house in what looks like a retirement village over here, and then I could potentially just quit? And like I talked with the wife, and it was almost straight away we went, we should just buy the small one and quit. Like, what the fuck we did? And so we did that. And like I think this is the thing that then led me into understanding community better, because I'm living in this like little strata development. There's like 15 houses around a pool, and it was originally supposed to be one of those like over 55 style Australian retirement villas, but they never filled the paperwork, so it just didn't get that. And a bunch of people, I think back in the 80s, moved in, and they all came from the same street, and they were all really good friends. I think because it was originally populated with a bunch of people that were good friends, it just set the tone for the whole place. And everybody just sort of goes, all right, well, we're friends. And then somebody dies off and somebody new comes in. And you come into this situation where everyone's just being friends. So you're like, all right, well, we're friends here, so I'll be friends as well. Like now everyone's just, it's, we've cycled through so many different people, but we still have like fish and chips by the pool. And, one of our neighbors turned 100 like last year. So we had like a big 100 years old party for this whole day and stuff. And it's just, everyone helps each other out. And God, I've picked up so many 90-year-old ladies like off the floor. It's just not even fun. But it was, I really got this like feel of like, oh, this is what it means to like live in a community with other people and just help them. And it's like, this is so much nicer. So I know the wife will, like take the piss, and she's like, you just want to go and live on a cult, don't you? Like out in the forest. It's like not a cult per se. It would be a super capitalist cult. Like, it'd be one big block of land, and we'd all have our own bits, and that's ours. But yeah, there'd be a clubhouse in the middle, and we'd meet up and we'd have barbecues and we'd have a great time. And maybe we'd share some of the jobs around. You do the veggies, you do the cows, like jobs are good.
That sounds like a good setup to me. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying before about, you were saying like you weren't necessarily religious, but you could see the benefit of religion in terms of community and providing some of those structures morally even. And it's a good way to check in and to be, to put a face to a name and to feel more connected in that way. Because over time, I do notice that there's more and more of an erosion of that meaning that we derive from the institutions that we normally link in with. And sometimes that's religion. Sometimes that is things like where we work or our local community. And look, there's far more institutions than that. But I think being able to get back to something that connects us, because social media, despite it being amazing for all the sort of decentralized opportunities that it's provided, it has made us a little bit far more disconnected than what we were previously. So being able to get back to something that's a bit more community driven while still being capitalist and giving you your own freedom and allowing you to share when it works for both parties. Perfect. Sounds great. I want to join. Let me know once it's there.
Yeah, it's I don't know how many people I can convince to go over to the southwest of Australia, but it was probably easier the last maybe a year ago than it was now. Like we're not being the most sensible right now, which is a shame.
Yeah, true. I think there's a bit of that going on everywhere as well. Look, I'm just curious because you make total sense to me in terms of the reason of getting into Bitcoin, the approach that you're taking, your vision for probably both Bitcoin as well as Bitcoin for humans. What has other people's reactions been? Like, if you have a partner who's not as full on into Bitcoin as you, sometimes that can be a bit of a, I don't know, the word is not really sticking point, but that can be like maybe a point of contention or something, or even friends and family who just don't get it. And they can either be a bit condescending or they can be outright critical. And just, yeah, I'm curious, what's people's reactions been of you transitioning into a Bitcoin focused job?
Transitioning.
Yeah. That's a nice loaded word too.
I mean, like my wife is very sensible and supportive in general. And like, I think we've always been a bit, we've got tendencies towards like minimalism. We've got tendencies towards homeschooling type stuff. We're sort of in that maybe weekend hippie type vibe, if you know what I mean. So I think she was like, all right, this is a thing you're interested in. And I think maybe a couple of years ago, she didn't really take it that seriously. Having seen us like go through a bull run, and she's like, all right, I kind of get why you did that now. So that helps. In terms of like leaving to focus on the business, I mean, I probably stayed in my job longer than I would have done because I had a family. And, it was like one of the things, I don't know, this might be a bit emotional. One of the reasons that I felt bad about my last experiment with Karma Pay was I almost wondered if I was just like kind of gambling the kid's future because I'm such an egotistical prick that I felt like I could have this big impact on the world. And like that really like to get over that again and like go out and go like, no, that's not what it is. I can try and be happy and do something meaningful for people. It's not just, I don't have to just shut up and live in the work pod. I can go back out there and have another crack at it. But it was the wife that was like, look, you're not happy. Like she said, I'll come back. She'll come back in at like maybe like 10 p.m. or something like that. She's been out with a friend for dinner. And she'd come back in and she'd see me like on the couch, like in the dark, like an iPad. And she's like, oh, what are you doing? I'll turn it around and I'll be like, oh, I'm just watching this whiteboard video about like macroeconomics. And she's like, just do that. Like, what are you playing with? Like, why are you trying to act like you don't know what it is that you care about? Like, it's clearly it's Bitcoin. It's the economics. If you don't like what's going on in the world, you don't like how this sort of stuff, just go and do something about that. Like, we can figure it out. And so I was like, all right. So she was very good at supporting me in that. I mean, where other people, I think, just wonder, you go, well, what are you doing? Like, you're not a teacher or a doctor or a dentist. So I don't understand at all what's happening. Like, is there any money involved? And I'm a bit like, not yet. No, like I think it's meaningful to sort of help get people into Bitcoin. I think that there's a pipeline there. I think if I can do that, then I'll be able to make money out of that, and that'll be okay. But for the moment, I just want to focus on doing something that I think is important. And I think that's the first bit of the important plan, which will then grow into this. And they're like, all right, I don't get it. You're not a doctor. I give up. It's just, and then we just talk about something else. I think most of my friends know that I love Bitcoin and that I care about it. I don't force it down their throats. I just don't think it's worthwhile. But when they have questions, I then answer them, and then over time they just convert themselves. Like, I think that's the easiest way with friends.
It makes sense. Less conflict, and I think that's when people are, well, they're more receptive to it, is when they're prepared and when they have asked the questions themselves rather than you coming pre-prepared with something to present to them. And it's good to hear that people have been supportive even if they haven't understood it. And I think as long as you have that thought of, am I doing this just out of ego, or am I doing this because this seems like a calculated risk to take that's going to be useful for the world and then therefore would be useful for me and my children and make me a happier person, which then makes me a better father and partner and everything else. That just makes it's a no-brainer decision, really, isn't it? Even though it's incredibly difficult to make that decision to do, but you kind of have to let your fiat self die and embrace Bitcoin, as challenging as it is.
And I think there's the maxim that I like is that one that says, if you put a bad entrepreneur, a good entrepreneur in a bad market, then the market wins. But if you put a bad entrepreneur in a good market, then the market wins. So pick a market that's growing and it's going to win. And
Definitely.
then just be a bad entrepreneur if need be. And hopefully you'll get to be a good one over time. Whereas I feel like last time I was trying to solve a problem that nobody was asking me to solve. And like, that's the issue I just need to get over with. And it took me a while to, just accept, as I say, my own ego there and just say, look, it's not about you thinking you're clever. It's about people actually wanting you to do this for them. So go and solve something that's an issue at the moment. Now, what
Yeah.
has been interesting in the last few weeks is a lot more people are a lot more interested in Bitcoin. So I don't know if you've seen the same, but since things like the trucker convoy issues and like what's going on in Russia and the Ukraine and that deplatforming, people have started to look at this and just go, oh, like that's weird that like 150 million Russians are they've just been cut off from everything. Like, it's not like I'm on the Russian side of the war, let's say, but it's like, I could be. If you're an American, you've done a fair amount of bombing of indiscriminate countries. You wouldn't necessarily expect to get cut off from the rest of the world's financial system. And that's starting to crop up. And like, I keep a kind of like vague, informal list of my core thesis with Bitcoin is that, look, it's I would call it like, where do you want to stand in an earthquake? And it's like, look, if there's an earthquake in New Zealand, one of the better places to be is Scotland. Just don't be in New Zealand. Just be somewhere else. And it's like, look, if there's going to be a currency collapse, the best place to be is not in that currency. And if we think that there's a systemic global debt problem, then the best place to be is not in that global systemic debt. It's in something else. Like, what's that parallel thing? And like, that's what I think Bitcoin is. It's like the next parallel institution that's a little bit small at the moment, but I think could grow. And I said, so if that's true, then what I would expect to see is just a range of escalating currency collapses throughout the world. And it used to be that when you wanted to talk about hyperinflation, you would always talk about Zimbabwe like 10 years ago. And that was like the example, or Weimar, something was a long time ago. And then you talk about Venezuela more recently, and you say, okay, well, that's weird because they were, the prime of South America at one point with all the oil that they had, and then now it's just completely collapsing onto crap. And then it was like, oh, and Lebanon is having issues, and obviously they recently declared full bankruptcy in the central bank, and then Turkey's having problems and Kazakhstan's having problems, and then like spreads blew out on Egypt, and then Sri Lanka are demonstrating in the street and bankrupt and there's no food, and Peru are demonstrating in the street and they're bankrupt and there's no food, and then we're seeing like shops getting turned over in Shanghai, and you're like, oh, this is in Kazakhstan, the rebels like a few months ago, again, all about energy prices, and you're like, oh wow, this is really moving faster. It used to be that there was like 50 years in the first one, and then there was like 10 years, and then it was 5 years, and there's like months now we're getting into of just, there always seems to be a new country that's on the brink of some sort of collapse or major currency issue. And I think that's super worrying. And I think we sit here in Australia thinking that it could never happen to us without ever reckoning with the fact that we've got such a weak currency and kind of economy in many ways. I mean, I'm in West Australia. West Australia is super commodity rich, so it could save us, like through no good planning of our own. It could just be that commodities go so high that we're actually okay. But it's definitely more luck than judgment in that sense. But yeah, Australia's been doing yield curve control for a couple of years, and it only stopped because it turned out it wasn't actually doing yield curve control. As soon as the bond market actually put it to the test, they went, oh yeah, we just decided to stop the old yield curve control. And you're like, oh right, so you weren't really doing it. You were wasting a lot of money attempting to do it, but you actually have no means of control. And yeah, I mean, it's probably not. I don't think it's necessarily a great outlook for Bitcoin either. I mean, I'm not really a price talker in general, but I like to think of Bitcoin price as more like an indicator on what you're going to see in the rest of the economy. I think when you see weakness in Bitcoin, you should be getting worried because you're probably going to see weakness across the board elsewhere. And right now, I feel like we're getting those early signs. Like the euro dollar markets look weak, Bitcoin looks a bit weak. I think we're probably looking at a recession. Like, I think we're probably going to roll over some of the inflation stuff and prices are going to start crashing. I think when that happens, that's what triggers the next, crossing that. Like at the moment, the US Senate is just like bottlenecked on, they can't pass any spending bills. You remember like Build Back Better was going to be 10 trillion and the infrastructure was supposed to be 3 trillion. and they actually only passed about 2 trillion. I think like more than China banning Bitcoin, I think that's what took the steam out of Bitcoin sales, is when everybody realized that there's actually no new fiscal spending happening and there's no new real money coming into the economy. And I think what will trigger Bitcoin's maybe even detachment from the rest of the stuff is just when the bond market goes no bid in the next financial crisis, and then all of a sudden people go, oh crap. It's actually like the full sovereign debt bubble is now collapsing. We need to be somewhere else. This is the earthquake. Like, let's go stand in Scotland.
That's
Or
right.
Venice. Like Venice, because Bitcoin is Venice, apparently.
Yes, yeah, maybe that's more like than Scotland. But yeah, that's such a good metaphor, really. And you're right, you need to have some sort of thesis to say, well, if this was playing out, what would I expect to see? And you would expect to see currency collapse after currency collapse. You would expect that would be speeding up over time as well. And I mean, a lot of the things that you've sort of predicted there, I think, are not outrageous, and it's quite likely to occur. And that is the thing that makes people wake up. And kind of going back to where you started with that as well, was that more people are certainly talking to me about Bitcoin and asking about Bitcoin, or when we're talking about world events, and I just throw in like a little teaser or just something about Bitcoin, it's no longer either dismissed or rejected. It's now like, oh yeah, I kind of get that. Like, I have a very good friend who's a gold bug that also works in the finance sector, and he understands the catastrophic nature of the debt-based system that we're in, but his strategy is to stockpile gold. And so we've talked about Bitcoin plenty of times before, and it's always been like, yeah, that might be the thing, but gold's definitely going to be the thing, until Canadian trucker protests, some of the issues in Ukraine and Russia, when he started realizing that, oh, so, well, gold can be confiscated. You might actually buy some gold that is very difficult to verify that it's, that it's real. And Bitcoin has that already solved. It's censorship resistant. It's fully auditable. It's very easy to transfer anywhere in your head, or even just send it to another wallet 24/7, globally, instantly. It's those sort of things that have made people go, okay, maybe I should pay a little bit of attention to this. Maybe I don't believe it's going to be the next thing, but maybe this is a decent hedge that I should have, because you're right. If there is an earthquake, you don't want to be in that particular locale. And if we know that this system is on a downward trend, you don't want to be in that system. You want to be at least, 1 foot somewhere else.
Yeah, it's kind of like the real diversification, right? Like, you get some of the macro guys that you can follow on Twitter and elsewhere would often talk about how, so what's his name? Who's the Artemis Capital guy? Chris Cole, who's like does the long vol, short vol stuff, like the serpent and the snake analogies and all this. It was kind of like he would say, the whole world is kind of short vol. Like, we're all just waiting for stuff to go up, assuming that there's no volatility, but the volatility never goes away. It just gets sort of like hidden and pushed somewhere else until eventually it can no longer be contained, and it just spikes out, and we have this like big long volatility moment where everything gets crushed. And in those moments is where it all goes bad. I feel like he's correct. Like, most of the assets that you can own are all short vol, and so he's got this view of like, oh, I want to be long vol. And then I feel like Bitcoin is okay, well, there's the short vol, there's the long vol, and then there's a different system. And I feel like, well, if I wanted to be diversified across properly, then I'd want to be looking at, okay, well, can I be short vol, long vol, and diff vol? Like, what's the other thing? And it's not that Bitcoin in its dollar price won't get caught up in this, and there will be massive swings, and there could be better opportunities to like kind of buy low and sell high. But the chance that I just happen to be, without any training, like the right guy that's just with the right nerve that just goes sell.
And the right time as well, because you might be the right guy with the right nerve, but if you don't get it at the right time, that's it.
And then you're like, the world's going to shit, and the world's going to shit, and like there's fire everywhere, and then I'm like, buy. Like, I'm probably not going to do that. Like, if I'm really honest with myself, I'd like to think that I can, and I'm sure when I look at the chart afterwards, I'll be like, why didn't I just sell and then buy, and I'd have more Bitcoin? But
it's always so obvious when you look at the chart afterwards.
But yeah, so I think just like having afterwards that, it's like, just go, all right, well, I'll be in that world, I'll be in that world, and I'll be in that world. And if any of these worlds play out, then at least I'm okay. Like, this is like how I would explain it to my dad, would be like, look, if it does replace all the money in the world, it's like the Satoshi quote, right? You may as well get some just in case it replaces global money.
Mm.
And if it replaces global money, like, the point I like to make is that we're not replacing, like, right now money is debt. If we replace it with Bitcoin, we're not going to rebuild this on a debt system, because debt was the problem in all the things that have just fucked up. So we're going to rebuild it on an equity-based system. So it's going to be an equity money that's more or less fully backed. Like, yes, there may be some contracts at a local level where it's not always fully collateralized, but it's not going to be systemically debt. Credit and debt will still exist. It has to. Like, that's fine. But what you're going to see is that you're going to have to collapse all the value of the debt into the equity. It's not going to be like, all right, well, there's $20 trillion of US dollars. Therefore, if we go to $20 trillion, we replace it. No. Those $20 trillion represent hundreds and hundreds and trillions of dollars. And this is likely to collapse. Plus, we're likely to remove monetization from other goods, which is only a good thing. Like, cheaper houses is good. Like, things getting cheaper is good, despite what the telly tells you. Like, it's one of those great lies. Like, we should, like, in our 30s, when we wake up and we go, this is bollocks, we should wake up and go, why is stuff getting more expensive better? Damn it. Like, why can't we just have stuff go down? Surely That's better. That makes way more sense. But
I think with the money, like with prices deflating, I believe the reason that most people always think that that's a bad thing is because it's always in the context of some sort of economic collapse, but that's due to the debt-based system that we're in, not inherently because prices deflating is a bad thing. Prices deflating, you're right, leads to greater abundance. We could work less and have more and things would be cheaper. But instead, people associate that with not being able to pay your debt, and therefore things start to collapse. But that's a problem with the debt-based system, not the deflating prices.
Didn't have the debt.
Yeah.
So I think there's another one as well, which is that, like, I do have an article on this on bitcoinforhumans.com. I think it's called Inflation and Deflation. And it's the idea that I think what we do with inflation is it's the old cart before the horse type thing, where you go, all right, well, if we saw prices get slightly, I think the logic was something along the lines of, right, okay, well, people are getting paid more and doing well, and they have more wealth, so they're spending more. There's more money and wealth in society, which is then chasing these goods, and therefore the goods go up because we're so prosperous that these people have more money to spend on goods. And they go, all right, so what you'd see is this like gradual rising of prices. So they take that measure and then go, all right, we want the prices to go up. And you go, no, the prices are only supposed to go up if everyone's earning so much money because they're so productive that they're spending more money. And that's why the prices go up in that locality. And they go, yeah, no, but that's too difficult. So we're going to focus on prices going up. And it's like when you see it in like companies all the time where they go, all right, well, let's just focus on that measure. And that measure gets instantly gamed and is then meaningless because everybody just goes, all right, well, the only thing I need to do is make sure we get the prices up 2%. So just print more money. It was never that there was more wealth. It was all nonsense to begin with anyway, because it's weird. Like, what's the price of money can go down. You can still have more wealth in society. Like, wealth is access to goods and services and more things. But I think that's what they're doing with the inflation, is just assuming that they go, because it's prosperous, we wouldn't want something declining, we want it going up. And then the measure just becomes pointless. But
yeah, we're trying to capture such a complicated thing. You could probably say this for many things that we do in life, but especially like the economy. It's so complicated, and trying to capture it in two numbers. GDP good. If GDP number go up, everyone's happy. And CPI kind of good, but to a certain point, maybe a bit bad. So you want it to be between about 2 to 3%, and then it's really good, which is rubbish. Obviously, it's far more like a vector than it is just a single unit. Not that CPI is even a proper unit of measure anyway. But you're right. Like, it gets gamed. People realize, like, okay, so my job, my pay, my feeling of value is all derived from what this number does. And if I know that, there are certain ways to make that number go up, regardless of whether it's actually producing value or not, people, evolutionarily speaking, again, we go towards the path of least resistance that provides some level of value or additional resources. Why wouldn't people do that?
Yeah. Well, it's like, and I think a lot of it is, again, like the productivity argument comes from kind of like wages. And it's that focus on labor and saying like, okay, well, we want wages to go up, and people will go, yeah, I want my salary to go up. That makes sense. And it's like, yeah, if your salary is going up because you're so good or you're competing so well and you're worth so much, then that's good. If your salary is going up because and you're getting worse, it's just that we've printed more money and the cost of everything has gone up, and therefore we have to pay you more to keep up with the costs. That's bad. It matters like what the reason is for that change, not just the change itself. And I think we're just focusing on the change. And if you flip the question and you say to people, would you like prices to go up over time, or would you like prices to go down over time? They go, well, I prefer the prices to go down over the time. Like, yeah, I'm not a psychopath. I'm just over here with my unsound ladder working on the roof. No. That's like the prices go down. And then you go, oh, well, what if your salary went, oh, I can't have the salary go down. So I think that's the issue. It's just, we're very like fixed on that, the salary going up and down as being the main issue. But that leads us into that almost frog boiling in the pot of water, where we go, okay, well, as long as salaries go up, if salaries go up 2% a year and we just happen to do inflation at 20% a year, nobody seems to notice that. And well, we get to steal lots of money from society. So fantastic. So like, why wouldn't you do that if nobody's complaining and everybody appears to be happy? Yeah, I don't know. It's a hard incentive to work around. Like, I don't know if I'd want to be in that position where I don't know if I'd be that great. Maybe I'd be right, motherfucker. Hopefully not.
It's an unenviable position, isn't it? Because if you understand how people think about things, and that, yeah, we do get fixated on this one figure, and people often don't look to those second and third order effects. You kind of get stuck. You've only got two levers that you can pull to some degree. And like, one of the things that I'm thinking here is that when people want their wage to go up, what they often don't think about is that sometimes would mean that smaller organizations would have less ability to recruit and compete. And it then becomes more centralized, and we go to larger organizations. And so we create these sort of weird after effects. And people maybe initially would be like, well, I'm happy because the minimum wage has gone up, or I've gotten a higher increase in my wage this year than what's usual. But if that starts to cut out certain players from the market, it means that all of society suffers to some degree. We have less competition, again, more centralization. It's just, unenviable position. I don't think there's a simple solution, apart from, like you say, like a collapse, because Bitcoin is a simple solution. But I mean, getting to that point, people, I think, are going to need something explosive for them to say, we can't do that again. So if it's a slow bleed, everyone loses their wealth. The few at the top get even more rich. And there's a possibility that, I don't know, it all kind of loops back on itself. But I think a collapse leads people to saying, we can't do it again. Let's do a new thing.
So you're also incentivized as well, right? Because the big companies themselves can afford to pay the higher wages because, as we said earlier, they do get the cheaper access to the debt. So it's not really that much of an issue for them. They don't have to remain that cash flow positive anyway. They're really just tapping markets and getting cheap money, so they can pay you more and therefore squash out the smaller companies. But also as an individual, if you're a member of, so if I'm in Perth, if I go and work for Rio Tinto and I go to a bank and ask for a loan, they're going to give me a loan. There's going to be no issue with that. But if I'm a self-employed businessman and I want to go and buy a house, it's much harder. So it's very difficult to then, get yourself away, as you say, from that debt-based system, because all of the incentives just go that one way. And I think we can't. The key is to, Tony Robbins always used to say, don't. There's a game that's being played, and the key is to understand the rules of the game and then just play a different game with different rules instead, and then win at that game. I think this is the situation we need right now with Bitcoin. Is just this is crap. It's all going to hell in a handbasket. We need to play a different game over here, and it's the whole circular economy almost argument of just. But I remember being on Twitter years ago and just being like, fuck, we're going to have to rebuild the whole internet, aren't we? This is how I was going down my self-hosting everything rabbit hole. And then like recently I've just been like, oh fuck, it's not even just the internet. God damn it. Like it's everything. It's like we need to rebuild friends. And then like from there we'll build up. It's like let's figure out how we can just be nice to other people again. And then we'll have communities, and then we'll trade, and then we'll build institutions like banks. But fuck, we need to like rebuild from trust on upwards. And this is I didn't want that. If you know what I mean. Like it's like if you'd have said to me, Pete, what's the big challenge you want to have to be dealing with in your life and for your kids to go through, I wouldn't be like, oh, I hope we can just eliminate all trust in society and then have to rebuild it. Like I really want to be on the other side of that. But I guess that's just what we have to do now is you go, right, well, and this is where I was with my previous role in like a large IT company. And I was just like, I felt like I was working for the baddies. And they were one of the better companies in that echelon, but still. And it really was that case that I was sitting at the beach one day and I was writing out like, what in a journal, like, what am I going to do? And I characterized it, I think, under the term of Orwell's boot. I said, like, it's kind of, I feel like there's these like two opposing forces in the world, and you got like the Goliaths, which are these like big entities, and they've got everything that they want. They've got all the armor, they're big and strong, and they're supposed to win, and everything's going right for them. And then you've got like David. David just wants to be left the fuck alone, and he just wants to get on with his life. But Goliath's here now, and like what happened in that story is that David had access to just this like beautiful little technology in the sling that gave him a lot of leverage and made all the difference. And I was like, look, I think what we need to do is we need to arm the Davids. Like what's the technology? Like, how do we get the Davids working together? How do we get them supporting each other? And how do we then just fucking ignore Goliath? We'll use the technology and we'll work around it. And I think when I was writing it out in the journal, the Orwell's boot thing was just like, look, we've got this world where we're either working towards one of these two outcomes. And like there's one outcome is the world's going to be highly centralized. We're going to give power to fewer and fewer people. And it's going to look like, Orwell's view of the future when he said, if you want a view of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human's face forever. Or we have the world where we just decentralize power, we make things local, and we start helping each other out, and we build around like small businesses and localized institutions, and that is going to be lovely. And I was like, look, I feel like when I work for this massive conglomerate, I'm showing a preference for Orwell's boot, and I just can't do that anymore. I need to just go. And it was really like I don't know if you've read like Atlas Shrugged, but it really was my like Gulch moment where I was like, I can't do it anymore. Like it doesn't matter that I'm definitely going to be worse off making this decision. And it's not like I'd gone and established a career over here that I was going to jump into. It was purely like a moral and values based decision where I just said, like, I can't in good conscience continue to help build that world. So I'm going to just go and move over here and start pushing that way instead. And right now that I'm probably not having a big impact. I'm about to go on a nice holiday, go back to the UK and see the family and things like that. So I'm good. I've got time. I can get stuff done. But I need to just push that way, and I think that's the important thing. So it's obviously if there's any Bitcoiners out there feeling a bit like that, and I dare say there are, and I know I've talked to a few who feel that way, but there is the comfort of the boot. Like just think about the future and like what you want to be part of. And I think the more of us go this way, the better it's going to become. So yeah,
that's so profound. And that, sorry, you go.
I was going to say, look, and you can always come and join me, and we'll just do that together. We'll go.
Absolutely,
I'm happy to build with other people. Like it's just.
I think the more people hear stories like this, which I think in my mind is part of the podcast, is people's origin stories, but the origin stories are never easy. There's always a challenge. There's always a point. There's always some, contention where it's like, I'm not happy with where I am, not because I'm just not doing the thing that's right for me, but I'm not doing the thing that's right for the world. And transitioning to something that is right for the world, it's not an easy thing to do. You have to take risks. You have to build things, and you put yourself out there. But I think the more people that do it, the more we do put this technology, which has this asymmetric advantage, like David's sling, we equip more and more people with that. And just through evangelizing Bitcoin, some people build Bitcoin at its core or applications. It's all very synergistic. And although there's a lot of sacrifice there to begin with, I do feel like Bitcoin and the community pays it back over time. And I mean, look, even if it doesn't, I feel kind of comfortable knowing that, we're planting trees that we don't get to sit underneath the shade of. It's something that we're doing for the right reasons. And it feels good, even if it might make life a bit more challenging sometimes as well. And so, what's the word? Mirror what you've just said, or reflect what you've just said. If, people are out there thinking like, this sounds really interesting, I'd like to do something with Bitcoin too, but financial freedom with, being under Orwell's boot seems a bit better. So just give that a little bit more time. I think eventually you'll reach the tipping point where it's much nicer to take a bit of a risk and do something that feels more meaningful and valuable and puts good things out to the world.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the nice things that Bitcoin does is, like as we said earlier, with the small business that's cash flow positive, right? As long as you're making money and you put it away, then over time, I think Bitcoin just releases people as you go. Back in the day, it was very difficult for somebody to work for Bitcoin when it was, in 2009. But the people that were around in 2009, by 2013, it wasn't that difficult for them because they'd had such a huge appreciation in the money that they got. And then by, 2020 and 2022, wherever we are now, it's got to the point where it's like, all right, well, I really should be giving back. It's almost, I think you're going to see that as it keeps doing its thing, more and more people are just like, yeah, if not me, then who? And, yes, I could just sit here on my arse on this beach for a while, but the reality is that's not going to work if the whole world goes to shit. So I guess we best get back to building it. And I think you'll see a lot more of that sort of early capital coming back into the fold. I hope. Unfortunately, it all seems to go to pointless shitcoin experiments, which is a shame. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So it would be love to see more coming back into Bitcoin.
Definitely. And I think sometimes people just get a bit waylaid with the marketing. They misallocate resources somewhere else, they get burnt, and then start to look back for what would be the safer asset, which is something like Bitcoin. I think the really cool thing that a lot of people, and this has dawned on me recently, but a lot of people don't consider maybe when deciding do they make the jump and focus on Bitcoin, is that Bitcoin is so new, like the technology leading to it, been around for like 40, 50 years. However, Bitcoin in and of itself, the community, the institutions, the infrastructure being built up around it is 13 years old. Whereas if you were to be an electrician, a doctor, a pilot, whatever it might be, there's decades and centuries of experience that, well, it'll take you decades to become a master. And even at that point, you'll always still be learning. You'll probably never be quite there at that, that top few percent. Whereas I think Bitcoin provides more of an opportunity to be at that top few percent if you really want to be, because there's less to catch up on to a certain degree. And even at the moment in this early stage, there's less competition. Competition is going to be a great thing, but for anyone feeling like, it's too late for me to move into a Bitcoin type job, or it's too late for me to work on education, it's like, no, it's not. It's like the earliest point still. And you can upskill yourself very, very quickly in this space compared to, say, another type of industry or expertise that's got hundreds of years of history behind it. Bitcoin's relatively new, so you can catch up essentially.
So I don't know if this would be helpful, but like one of the things that got me over the line was that I was looking at like Bitcoin a job stuff for a while and just hoping that a job would show up with my particular expertise on it. And eventually I was just like looking at it and I was like, well, what am I doing? Like, the whole point of this thing is it's permissionless. Like, and there's a bunch of things that I want to exist. Like I would look at something like Unchained Capital and I'd be like, oh, that'd be great if that was, there's the Australian version of that. Or I'd look at Strike and go, oh, it'd be great if there was the the Australian version of that. And I'm like, oh no, hang on a minute, it's all permissionless. Like I could just make the Australian version of that. Like, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I like sat here waiting for somebody to move over here or do something else? Like I could just go and copy all of the business models that seem to work in the US in Australia. Like it's just wide open. There's nobody doing it. Fuck it. Like, there's all sorts of things that we could do.
Exactly.
And you kind of forget that that's the point. It's permissionless. And like there's this weird thing that I think we can get into in Bitcoiners, particularly where we're more technical, where we for decentralization is good and we believe it is somewhat paramount, right? And we go, all right, well, Bitcoin is decentralized and the technology that it's built on, like, is one of the reasons, and like how it's built is a reason why we get that decentralized property. But we kind of forget that we've always had decentralized ways of solving problems, and that markets are decentralized ways of solving problems. It's just people meeting under no fixed rule set to figure out how we're gonna trade, how we're gonna allocate stuff, how do we solve problems. And we always try and like fixate on solving a problem technically, like, oh, Strike's great, but it's not decentralized enough because it goes through Jack. And you go, yeah, but like 10,000 strikes, is that not decentralized as well? Like that seems all right. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the idea of the CFD on Bitcoin with the DLC. So I've been like playing around with I don't know if you know Itchy Sats, the protocol. Like I've been playing around with hosting my own version of this a bit recently on the testnet. But like, well, how do you bet against the price of Bitcoin to then create dollar stability? So I think in that sort of banking relationship, you could get a long way by saying like, okay, well, now we've got people moving into Bitcoin and we have a positive flow of purchasers. Well, can you short against that in order to provide stable coin balances for people? So, you as an individual can effectively create your own stability. You look after it yourself. I don't care. But, we'll provide a market, we'll make a market long and short. So you can decide if you want to go long Bitcoin or short Bitcoin. We don't care which way you want to do, but it allows you to have stability, and here's a tool. And then you've got people on dollars on Bitcoin. And I know that, like we can do this with Tether and all sorts of other stable coins, but if you were in Afghanistan or something like that, and you've just had your entire country decimated, and then the US stole all your gold because some Saudis took down a building in the US, and you mean, what the fuck's going on? But, it might be nice to be able to deploy like a banking network in there that can't be stopped. And if you want it to not be stopped, it needs to run on something like Bitcoin. Like Tether can be stopped, and it will be stopped and blacklisted where it's deemed to be used in the wrong place. So you say, well, why not just deploy Bitcoin? That's great. But again, if you've just, as I say, you're in Venezuela, you've probably had a gutful of volatile currencies. I know that we go, oh, it's not that bad. And it's not that bad. It doesn't move about too much. Like, I feel like for 4 years, the price of Bitcoin was basically $9,000. It's just sometimes it was plus $5,000, sometimes it was less $5,000. But it's more or less $9,000 if you're buying consistently. And you go, yeah, but they don't want the volatility. So if they can just decide, I'm going to hedge my own volatility, and there's a market that supports that, then I think you've got a solution there to just dollars on Bitcoin that I'd like, to see built and to be part of. Because you could then start deploying Bitcoin in like a really meaningful way for banking infrastructure in those countries. And then we could open source that. And now we've got an open source banking network pattern that sits on Bitcoin. So like, this is a major area of interest for me. It's like, oh, how do you go and deploy that around the world? Because that seems like a problem that, yes, we don't have it in Australia now. I'm not convinced we won't have it in like 2025, but it'd be good if we can get it out of the door. I'd love to hold, US dollars on Bitcoin that just couldn't be taken from me. Yes, I could hold Tether on Liquid, but at the end of the day, that's in a bank account somewhere else, and that whole bank account could disappear overnight. Or I could just be blacklisted for whatever reason, or you could be forced to register on a whitelist. Like, if it was just pure sats that I was betting against some unknown anonymous person, well, then you can't take it. It's sats. It doesn't matter. It's just that I'm holding them as dollar-like. So I think there's a huge space there where we should be looking to push
Yeah.
into that. DLCs in general are, I think, quite amazing. I think we've just been, you know how like Ethereum's crap and everybody just does everything on chain. And the way I always describe it is it's like that guy in the business. So you say you're working in a big oil and gas firm. There's always like one guy there that's like, oh, why don't we just put everything in the historian database? Because most of the stuff's there. And you're like, don't do this. This is going to be so painful. Like you're literally going to break everything else in the business. And then the moment you need to make a change, you're going to move an office and your entire business is going to come crashing down because it's so like ridiculously interrelated. Like that's Ethereum. It's just like that business where they've gone, we'll just put it all in one big database and we'll ignore the problems. Like every time they try and do anything, like we just lose $500 million and it's just a mess. And it's like, I feel like in Bitcoin, we sort of had that scaling problem a few years ago. And you see it with all the talk of fees at the moment. And they go, oh, there's no fees. It's like, we could definitely fill the mempool. It's just we've been sat around like not doing DLCs on the main chain because we're like, nah, it won't scale long term. And we're all taking this super long-term view of it as like, well, it probably makes more sense to just focus on getting it right to put on Lightning so that when we get the scale, it works and we don't just put everybody on chain at the moment and then migrate everybody off chain in 2 weeks. And even, you know, like the Sure Bits guys, when they were talking about this a year ago, it's like very much like, look, we could do it on elliptic curve, but it's better on Schnorr. And so we may as well wait for Taproot and then we'll do the PTLCs and then we'll go on to like Taproot and we'll do the Lightning based DLCs and stuff. And so it's all coming, but it does sort of take that time. And yeah, like I find the fee thing interesting because you think like, yeah, there's no way we could not fill it up. We could fill it up. We could do all the stuff that we used to do that we decided was ridiculous to do again. It's just we don't anymore. All those people went to Ethereum because they were daft and they were just chasing scams.
Pretty much. Yeah, I agree. And look, there's a lot to be bullish there. You're right, because there's so many protocols now, second and third layer, like Taro, which is building on Taproot, but enables assets to be, issued on Lightning Network. You've got RGB, which has been around for quite a while, but that's, again, another layer 3 working on Lightning Network. You've even got things like Synonym, which are, I think they're backed by Tether. By backed, I mean like they have funding from Tether. And their intention is to have a stable coin on layer 2, so Lightning again, and then start issuing other types of coins. So there will come a time where, you're right, being able to hold, say, US dollar, but in sats rather than actually US dollar in a bank account somewhere or US dollar on Ethereum somewhere, that's going to be more secure. And I like the idea of kind of hedging your own bet. And maybe correct me if I don't have this quite right, but it's kind of like buying spot Bitcoin, for example, but then taking out a contract for difference or a CFD saying, well, I think that the price might actually go down. And therefore, you're kind of locking in that value that you have. And the problem of then saying, oh, what about the volatility? You've sort of removed that because you hold both spot and also a hedge the other way as well with the contract for difference. And both of those things, they're possible now, but they're going to become far more accessible in future with things like second and third layer solutions, DLCs, like you said, sort of like making those bets and having an oracle. So it's, there's so much revolution to come that's going to remove probably one of the biggest issues many people have with Bitcoin, which is that volatility.
Yeah, definitely. Like, and I think particularly, I think if you're like an old Bitcoiner and you've been in it a very long time, I can see how you would wave it away because it's fine. Like, yes, my net worth fluctuates by these like millions of dollars a day, but you've gone past the point of it ever really affecting what you're going to do on a day to day, and most of your wealth it's just sat there and you're not using it. But like, as you know, like when you're a year in, like the volatility still really hurts at that point, and it's not until you've had this sort of like step change in price that you go, I can relax a bit now. Like, I mean, I'm not lucky enough that I wasn't in prior to the 2017 bull run. I just got sort of interested around that point. And it's like, now I'm like, okay, well, I'm a bit more comfortable, like telling people that, if you just buy and wait, it does its thing every now and again, and eventually you don't care. But just try not to worry about it. Just buy, buy every block, buy every 10 minutes, sort of thing on the way in, and that'd be pretty cool. But I think, yeah, if I was in a place where the currency is collapsing, I want all the properties of Bitcoin except the volatility. Like, it's all very well to say, like, oh, you can just sit it out for 5 years and be rich, but I'm not going to sit it out for 5 years to be rich while I die because I can't afford bread.
True.
So I would prefer the slightly more stable thing. Now, I don't think the US dollar is going to be stable forever, so I think that'll also go in its own free time. But then, maybe you peg it to something else. Maybe you don't. Maybe by that point, Bitcoin's just big enough that it's kind of stable and we don't worry about it. But I do think that there's like an interim view where if we could do that right now, and with nobody's permission, somebody in, let's pick a new one, we'll go with Sri Lanka right now, could just accept, I know a bunch of Sri Lankan people over here that want to send money back home. They can send money back, but the person isn't exposed to Bitcoin price risk and they just hold dollars. I mean, right now they get back rupees, and like, again, they have to keep sending money because they can't hold any value when it's there. If you could just do it in one hit and they can hold it locally and pass it out in US dollars and build that circular economy, like that circular economy stands a chance. The one in Australia where we're trying to like be all nicey and get coffee shops to adopt it is kind of bullshit. Like, I just don't think it matters that much compared to over here. So I think if we could do that, like, and you could make that market from Australia. You could be like, right, well, I will make a market for people in Sri Lanka where they want to go short and I'll go leverage long. The history of Bitcoin has not been lacking for people that wanted to anonymously go leverage long Bitcoin. Like, those people are easy to find. That's what BitMEX was. It's kind of, people will want to bet on the price of Bitcoin going up. But wouldn't it be great if, on the other hand of that, instead of like Arthur Hayes getting everyone's money, it was, somebody in a humanitarian crisis actually got stability. Like, it's like there's this, you could have this like really nice moral degenerate gambling going, which seems like it'd be a great thing to build. But
yeah, it just provides a service. And I do think the volatility thing is going to be less of an issue as we go on. But, as we go on, in quotations, who knows how long that is, whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. And in the meantime, we do need some way that's essentially profitable for someone to some degree to provide that stability to the volatility to someone else, especially in an area that has more of that humanitarian need. I think eventually it'll just, like, my thesis of how it'll play out is as we grow in market cap size, that volatility decreases. We're already seeing that historically. Each year is Bitcoin's least volatile year. And I think sometimes, unless people really need it to be quite stable, some people have the ability to let things fluctuate, but their emotions get the better of them. For those people, I normally try to suggest that see it as it's a very long-term thing. We're monetizing a new asset, and we've only seen, say, gold have that monetization over like 5,000 years, which in anyone's lifespan, it's not going to seem that volatile. Bitcoin is trading 24/7. There is no circuit breakers. You don't turn the market off like you do with traditional assets. And so all of those things added up, that less volatility over the years, monetizing a new asset is naturally volatile. And there's also no control over the market that can, help it stabilize. That can sometimes make people just, have the emotion, but don't react to it. Just let the Bitcoin sit there. But you're right, for those that can't deal with that volatility, that need the stability, then there's smart ways through things like DLCs and CFDs for people to make it profitable for themselves while making it useful and stable for others. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that if I was in Turkey and my currency was going to crap, I'd probably be willing to pay like 1%, I don't know, maybe even a month, just to have US dollars. Because that's the way I would be viewing it, is I could go get my paycheck, buy Bitcoin, turn it into US dollars, and it costs me 1%. And I'd probably go, okay, I will take that bet against the lira. because that's what's in my mind. I don't really care about Bitcoin. Bitcoin just solves the problem for me of how do I make a liquid market in this country and every other country in the world, and then connect the degenerate gamblers from over here in the West with these people that value the stability. And they probably do. Imagine if you could get paid 1% a month to go long Bitcoin. Because if you're a BitMEX, you're paying like 1% a day to somebody else. It's just
True.
like it's just. I think you flip the narrative there, where you go, oh right, and it's anonymous. You say, like I don't know. I mean, I know why I wouldn't just go out and publicly build that. It's because you'd probably get your head put on a stake by the SEC. So I'm kind of happy to like talk about it and go, God, I wish this existed. But I'm not necessarily going to go out and get myself arrested for it. But I wonder why that doesn't exist yet. And maybe it's just, I don't know if it's just we haven't like figured out that there's a whole shit ton of people that want to go long dollars and that we could make that market, or it's just because stable coins are good enough. I mean, my view is that they're going to be good enough until the moment they're not. And there's nothing technically that makes them good enough, in the same way that, Bitcoin, I think it either matters that it's censorship resistant or it doesn't matter that it's censorship resistant. And I think this is one of the major differences in the bet between Bitcoin and everything else that's on the table, but particularly like Ethereum, is that if it doesn't matter to be censorship resistant or decentralized, then maybe this will still be here in 5 years. But I think it will. And I think we've seen that, again, if we go back to that thesis view and say, well, what are the things that we might see if it really mattered that you had to be decentralized and censorship resistant? You'd say, well, I think you'd start seeing people getting their bank accounts frozen. And we've been seeing that for years, right? Like that's your Operation Choke Point stuff. And it was like, okay, well, yeah, it has existed. And, some people in that, like, sex work and gambling and various industries have started adopting this sort of stuff. And then you'd say, well, what if there was like this mass event where a whole bunch of people got their bank accounts frozen for doing something that was completely legal, and it was just done in retrospect? I mean, look, we just had one of those. And you think, wow, like what a Rubicon crossing moment of just, you did a legal thing, and then a few weeks later we decided it was illegal, and now you've no longer got a bank account. And people like look at that in the news and it'd be like, oh yeah, like a little bit of financial censorship. And you've kind of got to stop them and go, no, if you lose your bank account and your house, you don't own your house, right? Your house is debt, and you don't have a bank account, and they're going to foreclose your house because you're not going to have a means of paying that mortgage anymore. So you don't have that. Plus, you don't have any of the money that you had a moment ago. So now you don't have a home. You might even get your car taken away from you, and you're probably going to starve unless, you can fall onto the good graces of somebody else because you did something legally that somebody decided after the fact that was illegal. You're the dick at the party when you're doing that. But when, like when you do, people go, yeah, that's pretty bad. That's not what I was thinking of. When it was just like, oh, you lose your bank account. I think, oh no, I can't send a payment. It's like, no. This is just like, it's like extraditional, murder almost, just pretending it's not. You're just removing these people from society and all of the safeguards that, we have that keep us alive. Like, I just think it's criminal. And then you've got, well, what's the next thing you might see is like, oh, well, imagine if like a small country had its gold seized. Okay, so we've seen that with Venezuela, and we've seen it with Afghanistan, or like now fucking Russia. And like it's not that I don't have any sort of soft spot for Russia, and Putin's a monster, but you think like, wow, like I would have thought that being the biggest nuclear power meant something. Wow, that's strange. I didn't think you'd take all of their reserve assets. I mean, the sanctions are a little bit laughable because we just still, apparently everyone's just still buy oil. I think I saw one thing, they had this Latvian mix oil where they just mix it with the Russian oil at 49% Russian oil, and go, oh, it's Latvian oil.
Oh god.
There's always going to be these bullshit workarounds. And you think, like, Yeah, but I think when you see that, you go, all right, I think it's meaningful that you need to be uncensorable. It needs to be something that's like non-state. It needs to transcend all of this stuff. And it needs to be that nobody can take it from you. That matters. And now we just need to wait for the rest of the world to catch up to that. And it's unfortunate that the rest of the world catching up to that is going to be people losing access to stuff and countries losing access to their sovereign wealth. But it just looks like that's what's going to happen. Yeah.
I think that's what motivates change the most, is when it's sudden and when it's personal, and when it has that significant impact. And it's unfortunate, but that will be some level of creative destruction. And you're right that the censorship-resistant, permissionless nature of Bitcoin it really can't be understated, because when you have a slippery slope of ethics, when you have moving goalposts of laws, you can't build something on the old system, because it only works until it doesn't anymore, whether it's a currency or whether it's a banking type system. I think having something that's permissionless and censorship resistant it is probably the most two important qualities of Bitcoin that allow everything else to be built upon it.
Yeah, and I think everybody in Bitcoin thinks that matters. And we, maybe every now and again we have moments where we go, fuck, it just doesn't look like it does, because of how can there be so much just outright securities fraud going on over here in this other bit, and nobody seems to give a fuck. Maybe, as I said, one of my big learnings from the last business was look, Pete, maybe you're not listening to the market and you're just off on one. And I have that moment with Bitcoin where I go, look, am I just being too much of an egotist here? And I think that I'm right. And then I see, a whole bunch of people in Canada losing their bank. I see it's been going on for a long time anyway. Then you see the Venezuela not getting their gold. You see Afghanistan getting its sovereign wealth taken away. You see Russia getting its bank accounts gone. You go, no, right. This is, again, it's an accelerating trend that's just not really hit people's imagination yet. They don't quite understand what's going on here. It was before the market collapsed in March 2020. I remember listening to all the Macro Voices episodes at the time, and Eric Townsend going, I'm just going to record this episode and put a date on all the stuff we know right now, because I don't understand why nobody's freaking out and the market's not falling through the floor. And I just want something to point to when it's done. And then it was maybe 6 weeks later, it all fell into a heap. And or every gold bug for the last 30, 40 years, it's just been going, come on, it's about to die. It's all about to die. It seems crazy, but as they say, it can stay ridiculous longer than you can stay insolvent. So
that's right. But I think the vindication eventually shows up. That's the thing. And it's just convincing enough people in the meantime that there is an escape hatch, and just dip your toe in it, at least learn a bit about it. And that tends to be it tends to perpetuate people to learning more and to investing more and to really understanding it. So,
and that's why I think it matters that you're seeing the sovereign collapses, you're seeing the seizures, and you go, okay, that's confirmation that the thesis was probably correct. It did matter that we need to be decentralized. So I guess one of the next signals you would look for is, will we start to see aggressive whitelisting inside stable coins? That would be a bit of a red klaxon sort of going off, where you'd be like, all right, we always sort of assumed it was coming, but it has come. So that means it matters for the alternative to that, where, yes, maybe it's a bit slower, a bit more clunky, or a little bit more expensive, but there's the version where it is actually decentralized and you hold it yourself and there is no other third party. So I don't think you'll get that sort of solution until you see some of that censorship in stable coins. It's almost weird that it's not there now, but again, maybe it's just timing, right?
Yeah, true. I think so. And that people will be willing, I believe, to give up a little bit of their convenience for that, maybe clunkier or slower or earlier system, once they start to realize that convenience comes with a pretty high cost as well. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious to sort of shift gears a little bit as we I'm just conscious of time, so we'll come to a close soon. But we've talked a lot about probably the bullish things in Bitcoin, even some threats to Bitcoin, probably what people need in terms of education. But I'm curious, what topics that are kind of not related to Bitcoin did you get into because of Bitcoin, if that makes sense? Like, has it sent you down other rabbit holes that have then become, very kind of contagious in your life that you had no idea would happen because of Bitcoin?
Yeah, look, the big three are probably like macroeconomics. Like I just never cared. I wasn't bothered about it previously. I think so. There's that. There's self-hosting stuff and privacy. I think is another one. And then I think another one is probably, I don't know if this was really attached to Bitcoin so much as like I just trying to work through like a consistent moral philosophy of like, well, what do I think is good in the world and why? It, I don't know if it's because of Bitcoin or it just so happens that I've done it over the same sort of time period and found more like minds in Bitcoin with similar opinions of just like working through, all right, well, if something's not necessarily good on the face of it and I need to come up with a framework for why something is good or bad, well, then how do I look at the world? And then you come out of that, like, I don't know, a few months later and you're like, oh, I'm an anarchist in a polo shirt. How strange. That's not what I expected to happen. But you just like, I don't sort of see why the same person that makes the law about whether you need to be in a cage also has to, fill in the potholes on the road. And you're like, that's a weird set of things to lump together. And then you can like just take all the stuff that we just put under this magical umbrella of government and go, it's good. You go, it's weird set of things. I thought we liked division of labor. I thought that was more efficient. But and then once I started to unpick that thread, that went away. Went quite a long way down a rabbit hole. But
it makes you rethink things. I've heard it put as Bitcoin is a mirror. And once you understand the purpose of Bitcoin, the benefits of Bitcoin, you start to look at other aspects of your life in that same way, whether it's your perspectives on the world or whether it's how you spend your time, how you work on yourself, how you involve in the community. But I think once you kind of adopt Bitcoin, it's hard to adopt any other shit that we had in our fiat lives. I think you start to realize that it is shit, it is bollocks, and you need to kind of like move on from it and reconstruct your view of the world, and even sometimes come to that conclusion of like, I'm a voluntarist, I'm an anarcho-capitalist in polo shirt. I didn't know that would be the case, but now that I think about things at a deeper level, maybe there's something to that. And there's a bunch of other people that resonates with, and we're all on the same page about many other things. Not to say like, surround yourself with an echo chamber, but when you find people that question and they come up with very valid and reliable views, like that is a very good sounding board to have. And I think Bitcoin is great for that. It lets you reconceptualize your life and then get feedback from, people that have reconceptualized their lives too and been honest and genuine.
I mean, it takes us right back to the start of the conversation about, the weird little cult where everyone owns a house, but you've got the big clubhouse, right? I think this is why every bugger's moving to Austin. You go down this route and you, as you said, you question all these things and you want to have these like big conversations with people about, I think this and like, is this connected to it? And like, here's a crazy idea and, can fucking get rid of that. And you can't have that with like a normal person. And it's like somebody will say, oh, do you know anything about Bitcoin? And you want to go, it's a mirror. It's going to change everything. It will, but you really can't. Like they're not there. You kind of, so as soon as you like find anybody like locally to you that is into Bitcoin, you're like, can we just hang out and be friends now? Because I need somebody that I can have all these talks to, so my wife isn't just telling me to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I've got so many Bitcoin podcasts. It's not so much about. I mean, I'm really enjoying this today. Like, it's not so much necessarily about how everybody else needs to hear stuff. I think sometimes the two people on the call just want to talk for a long period of time.
100%, and that's what made me more easily make the jump into Bitcoin and education in this podcast is knowing like, I just want to talk to people about Bitcoin and no one will really let me do it. And the ones that will, and they're not at the level that I want them to be at, so I can have the actual deep and meaningful conversations about Bitcoin. So it's, these are always really enjoyable for me. I went to the Bush Bash a couple of weeks ago and I had this sort of diluted view, I guess. You got to come to me in the future. It is the community that you're looking for, like just based on what you said there. And I had this weird view on the way up there where I thought, oh, what if I get there and we don't really have anything to talk about because we've all seen the same podcasts, we've all watched the same, things, we've all read the same books, we've all been on Bitcoin Twitter, and we've all posted the same stuff. So like, we're all just going to sit around the room and just be like, yeah, we all get it, but what do we do now? What do we talk about? Wasn't like that at all, of course. That was very silly sort of thought to have. You got there, and there's that level of assumed knowledge. You get past the superficial small talk stuff, and you get straight into Bitcoin's a mirror and those kind of concepts. And so it's really rewarding. And I think that's very validating to know you're in the right kind of community with the right kind of people when you have that feeling of connection and you just cut straight through the crap into the stuff that matters. So, yeah.
Well, and at some point, Bitcoin is money, right? And then we're not going to keep going to like the money bash in the bush, right? So there's got to be more beyond like just like, oh, isn't it great that we've got sound money? We're not like 20 years down the line going, do you remember the old unsound money? That was daft, wasn't it? Like, we're going to be talking about other stuff and hopefully moving on to building bigger and better stuff. It's just right now, like, it's the single most important thing to do is to just solve this core incentive problem. I think anyway, in society, is just like, look, if you've got a few people that can just make any decision that they want and inflict it on other people and never feel the consequences, then those people aren't necessarily going to be the good people. And we shouldn't expect them to be the good people. And we should look for other systems that are more equitable and people do have more of a say in their own lives. And we need to build those. And isn't it weird that the way we're going to get there is we're going to go with this, oh, here you go, this magic internet money. Like, it's like, what the fuck? It makes no sense on the sense of it. You go, oh yeah, like some anonymous guy, he invented some magic internet money, and so what we're going to do is we're going to rebuild society. Like, you've got to give people some space to like get there. But I think the way to do it is with the proof is in the pudding, right? We just need to go and start. All right, a bunch of us now, we've spent the last 4 years since the last bull market in this like deep philosophical thing, the big circle jerk, and we're all kind of having a go at it. Now, yeah, we probably need to go and like actually build the institutions. Maybe we should just take out loans and invite other guys over and just be like, all right, we're going to learn to farm. Buy some like containerized vertical farming stuff and we'll get that going. We'll get some miners. We're going to share some food. We're going to have some barbecues. We'll write some songs. We should do all that sort of stuff. Maybe that's the key. But
I feel like that's where it's going. People are already talking about citadels and finding pockets of land that's near other land that you could create a community with. And because you're right, the most important thing is fix the money, fix the world, because by fixing the money, you fix the broken incentive system. And then you actually have a system that is engineered correctly where the outcomes are the things that you want and it feeds back into people's actions rather than the outcomes being the thing that you don't want. And therefore we keep just misallocating resources. But the next step, you're right, is to start building that out, to start making that real. We get it. And I think more people are getting it. And now it's taking action on it.
And I think that's what will bring, people like going to DeFi for yield. Like, I mean, it's like I can get X% of something that doesn't matter, that doesn't really exist, and hopefully I can flip it for something. But you're like, okay, like whatever. Like some people will look at that and they're always going to go over there. And it's generally like, all the same people that like Solana are the same people that like EOS. It's the same repackaged bullshit VC stuff where you're just going to get dumped on, and it's a shame that you keep going to that. Well, it doesn't really solve a problem. Bitcoin is fast. It's called Lightning. We have ways of doing stuff off chain. It's batching, it's Lightning, it's third parties, it's Chaumian mints, right? We can solve these problems. But like you just, the stuff that was really going to make a difference to somebody's life is, I have this feeling in my soul of emptiness and a lack of connection. And fuck me, what are those 200 guys over there that are just having a whale of a time? And they've got like that big parcel of land and there's a brewery on the front of it. But, apparently if you go down the back, there's this big clubhouse and they're fucking racing quad bikes around and having a laugh and building stuff. And you'd be like, oh, I want to do that. I don't know what it is, but that, like, you could actually build something that appeals to what people actually want. Like nobody wants to earn yield on shit coins. That's just gambling. So yeah, maybe it does the gambling itch. I think the big itch that people have that we need to scratch is just, how the fuck do I belong in this world where I've just been propagandized for years now about how I need to hate everybody and how people are the worst thing in the world and I need to give all this power over to everybody else because people will just do the wrong thing. It's like no, people are nice. We need to go back to trusting people. And like this, as I said earlier, like this is the big fuck, it's such a big task moment of going, right, all right, I guess we need to solve. Maybe that's the answer. I hadn't really thought about it like that until just now. But yeah, you've got to like, maybe we just need to prove like how to be a nice community and friends. And like Bitcoiners are, I know like on Twitter, like there's people get abrasive and stuff. But as you say, you go to a bush bash and it's just like brothers.
Yeah.
Just like, you've instantly got all this stuff in common and you've got similar worldviews and you're like, yeah, I could probably move in with you, but it's a bit forward to ask now because I only just met you in person. But yeah, we'd probably do all right in a community. I'd do a bit, you do a bit, we'd share, we'd trade. We're on the same page. But
Definitely, there is that vibe.
I'm going to be chewing that.
What's the Field of Dreams quote? If you build it, they will come. So I think we're at that point where we need to start, building. And even if that's just having our communities in a decentralized way at the moment, to give people that aren't in those communities something to aspire towards and to see that it can be better. Because the whole idea of statism is just doesn't make sense. It's essentially saying, I don't trust other people. I think other people could do bad things. So I'm going to choose a few other people and then they can make the rules for the rest of us and they can have the monopoly on violence and they can control the money and they can decide where it gets spent. And I'm letting them be in control because I don't trust people generally. Like that doesn't fucking make any sense at all. I think once we realize that people can be very trustworthy, but you need to choose the people that you trust. Sorry,
I can't remember the quote. I think it's like a Bastiat quote where he talks about that. And he says, what is it? What is this magic effectively that says people can't be trusted? So what we do is we see these people over here, we call them by a different name, and we assume that they can be trusted. And we just give them all the power. And it's like, are they not people too? It's like, yes, they are people. So like, what is it that we think has changed magically in these guys making a decision for themselves with little impact on everybody, and these guys making a decision that has to be correct because it's the one decision that matters. I think like Jeff Booth is probably like one of my favorite people in Bitcoin. I think his opinions are great, but like when he did his whole long form series with Robert Breedlove, they sort of went into a lot of the error correction stuff. I think this is really important. It's like the whole socialist capital what's the word? The calculation problem. That's what I was looking for. And it's like, look, you got to remember, like, if you give one person all the power, that person has to make just right decisions because we all have to do what they do. And we know that they can't, like mathematically in a complex system, they cannot make the right decision. So that's why it fails over time, is that they constantly make wrong decisions. The reason that like capitalism works over time is because nobody is making one decision. Everyone's making tiny little decisions from different angles. And then the people that get those done badly, they get taken out and they error correct, and somebody else who's doing well does well. And so you have to keep making good decisions to do well. And so you have this like built-in system that rearranges itself around what's actually going on in reality versus the statist model of just like, I will just make the right decision. And like, I mean, how many times have we heard that over the last 2 years? It's like, well, why didn't we just make all the correct decisions all the time? It's like, because you can't. There is no correct decisions. That's why you should let people adjust. And that's how you find the correct level. Like, yes, some things will be bad, and then some things will be too good, and then we'll figure out the right sort of balance that works for everybody. And that's what the world would look like if we got the fuck out of the way and let people self-organize. We don't all go around killing each other just because there's cops exist. It's like that old argument. You go, look, that guy is 10 Ks away and he's going to take about 4 hours to get here. So if you were going to kill me in a world where he didn't exist, I don't know what it is that you think is going to happen that you wouldn't just kill me now. It's like there's physically nothing stopping you. It's actually all the norms in society. It's the fact that if you actually, I've had this argument so many times in a pub. If you happen to say, oh, I'm a bit of an anarchist in my outlook of the world. And they go, oh, well, I'd just beat the crap out of you and steal your wallet. And you go, what? So no, you wouldn't, because we're here amongst friends. And everybody else around here would be like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, don't be a prick. Just stop that and move on. And then you wouldn't have any friends anymore. That's why you don't do it. It's got nothing to do with the cop. The cop just shows up afterwards to take pictures and he's like a tourist, a crime tourist that comes around and goes, oh, that's nice.
They did it this way this time. Yeah, that's right.
But, yeah,
and
sorry.
No, that makes total sense, because it's, violence is destructive for the most part, and there's always going to be some level of revenge. And so doing things in a voluntary fashion and having these pro-social norms is something that I think that we organically get to. And I guess that's the thing, like having central planning, having a few people that need to make all the right decisions, which they absolutely can't because things are far too complex. I think the assumption is that things are linear. So it's like the phases of the moon or the digestive system, where you kind of know what comes next, so you can reliably predict the outcome based on the first step. But life, humans, all the complicated interactions, it's far more emergent. You don't actually, like a swarm of locusts, none of them is leading, but it looks like they're going a particular direction. Or even things like traffic. Sometimes there's a traffic jam, then it all just clears up magically, and there wasn't even an accident. It was just like the right circumstances at the right time led to this emergent quality. And if you let people communicate and take on board their own decisions based on their own subjective experience and what's important to them, most of that emergent quality of life is totally fine. Like, we organically work it out through a free market. But yeah, when you have someone or a few at the top trying to make all the right decisions, there's just this assumption that it's linear and you can predict everything, which we know it's just not possible.
Definitely.
So any final thoughts? I think we've covered like a lot of really great topics. We've covered like macro, we've covered the philosophy of it, personal journeys, things to look forward to. But yeah, any thoughts, any final things that we didn't touch on, or that you'd like to just add a bit of icing on the cake?
Oh, look, I don't feel like this has been great. As I said, like, I am one of those, the sort of dog with two dicks that just can't wait to talk to people about Bitcoin. So I had wondered if this might go on for a couple of hours. So thank you for sticking with it. I've really enjoyed that. I think what I would say is maybe just from that, because one of the bigger things I'd done recently was just turning my back on, corporate world and money for poverty and Bitcoin, is that it's much nicer. Like your head is clear. You know that you're going to do something important, and there's something about only doing things in line with your values that is just so good for your mental health, that I think we should do this. And it's worth considering. I know everyone's in different situations, so I just make that appeal that, if you are just sat in a job that you just hate, you can just not do it. There are options. Like, maybe it's taking the time to plan out just a bit of a runway for yourself, or like how to make that transition. But don't not make that transition just because it's where you are and it's what you've been doing now, because it is all bollocks. Everybody's winging it. So why not wing it in Bitcoin? And, if anyone wants to help with any of the stuff that I've been talking about today, I would love other people to be working with, because I'm just a strange man when I'm left to my own devices, because I have all these conversations, but to myself in my own head, and it's not ideal. I need to talk to other people, and I need to just be building shit with other people. So yeah, it'd be great to hear from more people, find out who is out there in Australia, and like, how do we annex a state and turn it into a Bitcoin utopia?
Absolutely.
So,
I agree.
I'll leave it there. I mean, check out bitcoinforhumans.com, where I do write a fair amount, and I've been releasing videos on YouTube as well with some coming over some of these topics that we talk about. And I'd love feedback on that, because I know I'm not that great as of yet. So please, yeah.
What is your Twitter handle? Anything else people should follow you on?
So the Twitter handle is Pete_Winn. There you go, at Pete_Winn. So
easy. I'll
again,
add it to the show notes and the thing as well.
That came in as a nim. I have been putting stuff out on LinkedIn as well, because again, like, I think that the people we need to build this Bitcoiner pipeline for are just the people that aren't into it yet. And I've been getting like so much good feedback from people in LinkedIn that were like, oh yeah, I kind of wondered about this, but I haven't done any in-depth stuff. Every now and again, one will say, oh, I like Hex. And I just think, oh my God. I don't even know if it's worth trying to pull you out of that dark hole. Fucking hell. What's going on there? But yeah, like LinkedIn's fine, Twitter's fine, or bitcoinforhumans.com. Like, as I said, that's where you then get an alert every time I write articles about this stuff or put out videos. So
that's brilliant. And I think LinkedIn, I hate LinkedIn, but at the same time, going off the conversation that we've just had, like we need to go to where they're at. And if that's where people are at, maybe it makes sense to have a LinkedIn where you're actually spruiking some of this stuff and providing the education as well. And look, just to reflect what you've just said, because I feel like we're probably on a parallel journey in terms of getting into Bitcoin. But for anyone thinking about it, like, get out ahead of it, as in the path less traveled is usually a bit more fruitful. And so I think, surround yourself with people that motivate you, consume the content that motivates you, but take a chance, because if you're waiting for something to happen, that moment might never come. Or if it does, it sort of forces your hand into something that you didn't actually want. So I'd say get out ahead of it, do the autonomous thing, make the decision now, and you're surprised what you can make work over time.
I think I was the other day at a wedding. Somebody asked me about why I'd quit, and I said, "Oh, I'm just front running the deflationary bust that I would have got fired in anyway."
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it, because when shit really hits the fan, I think it's going to be much worse than what everyone thinks, and that's the moment where people start having regrets, going, "I wish I was building something in this parallel economy. I wish I was learning some skills, or I was networking a little bit." And you don't have to go all into it now. You can just dip your toe in, have one foot in it, and it'll become contagious, I believe. Well, thanks so much for your time, Pete. I'm sure we'll have other conversations in future, because again, this has been really fun, and I hope people enjoy it. I think we've touched on all the topics that people should be thinking about with Bitcoin, both simple and advanced. So thanks again for your time. Thanks everyone for listening. If you've got any comments or suggestions or requests, just reach out either on my personal Twitter, which is mission_Bitcoin, or even on the Hardblock Twitter, which is HardblockBTC. Thanks for listening, and until next time.